Fort Hood, Texas, August 15, 1991. The summer heat rose in visible waves from the asphalt of the vast tank yard. Row upon row of M1A1 Abrams tanks stood at attention like silent sentinels, their desert tan paint already applied in anticipation of deployment. The air smelled of diesel, hot metal, and purpose. America was preparing for war. James Harrison stood at the edge of the yard, squinting against the Texas sun. At 62, his frame remained solid, though his hair had long since turned steel gray. Deep lines etched his weathered face, telling stories of battles fought and men lost. He wore civilian clothes, a simple blue button-down, tucked into pressed khakis, but the military bearing never leaves a man like Harrison. His spine remained ramrod straight, his gaze unflinching as he surveyed the tanks before him. "Quite a sight, isn't it, sir?" Harrison turned to find a young officer approaching, his uniform pressed to perfection, captain's bars gleaming on his collar. "They're not M60s, Harrison replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. "But they'll do?" The young captain smiled uncertainly. "Colonel Harrison, I'm Captain Reynolds. I've been assigned to escort you to General Mitchell's office." Harrison nodded once. He'd been expecting this since the call came 3 days ago. The call that had pulled him from the quiet retirement he'd settled into after 40 years of service. The call that had used words like national security and vital expertise in one last mission. As they walked through the bustling base, Harrison noticed how soldiers looked at him. The younger ones with curiosity, the older ones with recognition. The Steel Eagle, they had called him once. The man who had led 3 M60 Patton tanks against 12 Soviet T-55s in the Aishau Valley in '72, and somehow brought his men home, all except one. The memories came unbidden, the jungle heat, the radio crackling with panicked voices, the smell of burning metal. Harrison pushed them away. That was another lifetime. General Mitchell's office was cool and quiet, a refuge from the Texas heat. The general himself stood when Harrison entered. They had served together once, long ago. "James," Mitchell said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." "Wasn't aware I had a choice, Frank," Harrison replied, but he took the offered hand. Mitchell smiled tightly. "You always have a choice. That's why I requested you specifically." "Requested me for what, exactly?" "Your call wasn't big on details." Mitchell gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Once they were seated, he slid a folder across the polished surface. "Top secret" was stamped across it in bold red letters. "We're sending nearly 2,000 M1A1 Abrams tanks to the Gulf," Mitchell said. "The most advanced tanks ever built, facing what intelligence tells us is the 4th largest army in the world, with thousands of Soviet T-72s. Harrison nodded slowly. Everyone with a television knew about Saddam Hussein's armored divisions. "The Joint Chiefs have some concerns," Mitchell continued. "These Abrams are different from anything we've fielded before. New technology, new systems. Our tank commanders are being asked to trust computers and thermal imaging instead of their eyes and instincts." "Progress marches on," Harrison said, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. "Maybe, but we're sending young men into battle in machines we're not entirely sure will perform as advertised when the shooting starts. That's where you come in." Mitchell opened the folder and pushed a photograph across the desk. It showed a modified M1A1 Abrams, different from the ones Harrison had seen in the yard. "This is prototype XM1A2, enhanced depleted uranium armor, improved fire control systems, digital battle command information system. It's the future, James." Harrison studied the photo. "What do you want from me? I retired before these things were even on the drawing board. I want you to lead the final evaluation team. 4 tanks, 16 men, 6 weeks of intensive field testing against our best OPFOR unit." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "You have dozens of active duty colonels who know these new tanks inside and out. Why pull an old warhorse out to pasture?" Mitchell's face grew serious. "Because none of them have ever faced what you faced in Vietnam. None of them know what it's like when everything goes wrong, when technology fails, when you're outnumbered and outgunned. I need someone who knows how to win, even when winning seems impossible." Harrison stared at his old friend. "You're not telling me everything." Mitchell sighed heavily. "The stakes are higher than you know. This isn't just about testing tanks. It's about whether we send the Abrams into battle at all. There's a faction in the Pentagon pushing to delay deployment, to rely on air power alone. If these tests don't go well, thousands of our troops will go to war without our best armor to protect them." Harrison felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. The weight he'd thought he'd put down for good. There's something else, Mitchell added, more hesitantly now. I took the liberty of arranging your supporting officer. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Send him in. The door opened and Harrison felt his heart stop for a moment. The man who entered was in his early 30s, tall and lean, with Harrison's own jawline and his mother's eyes. James Harrison Jr., his son, the son he hadn't spoken to in almost 7 years. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison reporting as ordered, sir, his son said formally, addressing the general while pointedly not looking at his father. Mitchell glanced between them, aware of the tension filling the room. I'll leave you two to get reacquainted. James, the details are in the folder. You start tomorrow. After the general left, the silence stretched between father and son like a chasm. You don't have to do this, Harrison Jr. finally said. I can tell the general you declined. Harrison studied his son's face. The boy he'd taught to fish was now a man with his own battle ribbons and command experience. A man who had made it clear years ago that he wanted nothing to do with his father's legacy or his father's shadow. Is that what you want? Harrison asked quietly. What I want doesn't matter. This is about national security. Everything's always about national security, isn't it? Harrison said, a lifetime of sacrificed birthdays and missed anniversaries in his voice. His son's jaw tightened. If you're going to make this personal, isn't it already? Harrison interrupted. You haven't answered my calls in 3 years. And you know why. Harrison did know. The argument that had finally shattered what was left of their relationship. His son's accusation that Harrison had chosen the Army over his family, over his dying wife. That he'd been at Fort Knox when Martha took her last breath, because duty had called. Your mother understood, Harrison said softly. She shouldn't have had to, his son replied, his voice cold. I requested a transfer as soon as I heard about this assignment. The general denied it. So let's be clear. This is a temporary duty assignment, nothing more. Harrison nodded once, the familiar pain settling in his chest. Understood, Lieutenant Colonel. His son turned to leave, then paused at the door. The men you'll be commanding are the best we have. Try not to get them killed, proving whatever point you came here to prove. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Harrison sat alone in the silent office, looking down at the folder. Inside was a chance to make a difference, to ensure America's sons went to war with the best protection possible. And perhaps, though he scarcely allowed himself to hope, a chance to bridge the gulf between himself and his only child. He opened the folder and began to read. The M1A2 testing area occupied a remote corner of Fort Hood's vast training grounds. 4 Abrams tanks stood in perfect alignment, their desert camouflage fresh, their 120mm guns raised to the exact same angle. Behind them, a prefabricated building served as the command center, and beyond that, transportable barracks housed the crews. Harrison arrived at dawn, the folder tucked under his arm, wearing the uniform he'd been provided. It felt strange after years in civilian clothes, but also right, like returning to his own skin after a long absence. A young officer hurried to meet him, saluting crisply. Colonel Harrison, sir. Lieutenant William Peterson, your XO for this operation. Harrison returned the salute. At ease, Lieutenant. Tell me about our team. As they walked toward the command center, Peterson briefed him with the efficiency of someone who had memorized every detail. 4 tank crews, sir, 16 men total, all with extensive experience on the M1 platform, specially selected for this evaluation. Your son, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, will be commanding Tank 2, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has Tank 3, and I'll be taking 4. You'll have Tank 1, our command vehicle. And our opposition? Peterson's expression changed subtly. Red Thunder, Colonel Zakharov's unit. They operate modified T-72s designed to simulate the most advanced Soviet armor. They've won every war game they've participated in for the past 3 years. Something in the lieutenant's tone caught Harrison's attention. You know Zakharov? Peterson hesitated. We attended the same technical symposium at MIT 4 years ago, before the Soviet Union began its collapse. It was part of a military exchange program. He's brilliant, sir. Graduated top of his class from Kazan Higher Tank Command School. Harrison filed this information away. What about you, Lieutenant? What's your background? ROTC at MIT, sir. Specialized in computer systems and battlefield networking. I've been working on the digital systems integration for the Abrams upgrades for the past 18 months. A tech expert then, not a tanker by training. Harrison wondered if that was by design. And what's your assessment of these new tanks, Lieutenant? Peterson's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. They're revolutionary, sir. The depleted uranium armor can withstand virtually any anti-tank round in existence. The fire control system can acquire, track, and engage targets while moving at top speed across rough terrain. The thermal imaging works in total darkness, through smoke, fog, or sandstorms. Sounds impressive, Harrison said. What happens when it breaks down? Peterson blinked. Sir? When the computer fails. When the fancy thermal imaging shorts out. When you're in the middle of a firefight and suddenly you're blind. What then? There are redundant systems, sir. And when those fail too? Peterson seemed genuinely perplexed. The failure rate in testing has been less than 0.001%. Harrison stopped walking and turned to face the younger man. Lieutenant, have you ever been in combat? No, sir, but I've logged over 500 hours in the simulation center. Simulation. Harrison let the word hang in the air. Let me tell you something, son. In real combat, Murphy's Law isn't just a saying, it's a promise. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong at the worst possible moment. And when that happens, all the technology in the world won't save you. What saves you is knowing your machine so well you can operate it blindfolded. It's instinct, intuition, the things they don't teach at MIT. Peterson's posture had stiffened, though to his credit, he didn't back down. With respect, sir, that may have been true for the M60. The M1A2 is a different beast entirely. Is it? Last I checked, it's still got men inside it. Men who bleed, men who die when their equipment fails them. Before Peterson could respond, a voice called out from the command center doorway. Colonel Harrison, the team is assembled and ready for your briefing. Harrison gave Peterson a final appraising look. We'll continue this discussion later, Lieutenant. Inside, 14 men stood at attention beside a large tactical display table. Harrison's son stood slightly apart, his face impassive. Harrison let his gaze move over each man, assessing, memorizing faces. At ease, gentlemen, he said, moving to the head of the table. For those who don't know me, I'm Colonel James Harrison. For the next 6 weeks, we'll be conducting the final evaluation of the M1A1 Abrams against OPFOR elements simulating the Iraqi Republican Guard. The results of our evaluation will directly impact the deployment of armor to Operation Desert Shield. He paused, letting the significance of that statement sink in. This isn't a training exercise. It's not a war game. It's a mission with real consequences for real soldiers. If we determine these tanks are ready for combat, they go to the Gulf. If not, our troops face Russian-built T-72s without them. I don't think I need to explain what that means. Harrison pointed to the tactical display showing the testing grounds. We'll be operating in conditions designed to simulate the Iraqi desert. Temperatures over 100 degrees. Sand getting into everything. Limited visibility, and facing us will be Red Thunder, commanded by Colonel Viktor Zakharov. At the mention of Zakharov's name, Harrison noticed his son's slight reaction, a tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. Interesting. I've been told Red Thunder is undefeated. Well, they haven't faced us yet. Harrison looked each man in the eye. Questions? A burly sergeant with a thick mustache raised his hand. Sir, I'm Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez. We've heard that Red Thunder has some special modifications to their T-72s. Any intel on what we're really up against? Harrison nodded approvingly at the question. Lieutenant Peterson was just about to brief us on that, Sergeant. Lieutenant? Peterson moved to the tactical display and brought up schematics of a T-72. Red Thunder operates a modified variant we call the T-72 M1R. Enhanced reactive armor on the turret and hull front, improved fire control system. And this, he highlighted the main gun, is a 125mm smoothbore capable of firing depleted uranium penetrators similar to our own. So they've got all our advantages, said a young specialist. Not quite, Peterson replied. They still lack our thermal imaging capabilities, our battle management systems, and our depleted uranium composite armor. Harrison studied the schematic. What about their numbers? Peterson hesitated. Standard OPFOR deployment is 7 tanks to our 4, sir, to simulate the numerical advantage Iraqi forces will have in theater. A murmur ran through the assembled men, nearly 2-to-1 odds. Good, Harrison said with a grim smile. Wouldn't want this to be too easy. The briefing continued with assignments and initial training schedules. Throughout, Harrison observed the dynamics of the team. Peterson was clearly respected for his technical knowledge, but it was Rodriguez the men looked to for reassurance. And his son, despite his obvious attempt to remain detached, commanded natural authority. As the men filed out to begin preparations, a slim, dark-haired woman in a specialist uniform approached. "Sir, I don't think we were introduced. I'm Specialist Sarah Coleman, your communications and systems specialist." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You're not part of the tank crew?" "No, sir. I'll be monitoring all digital systems from the command center and providing technical support as needed." Harrison nodded. "Good to have you aboard, Specialist." After everyone had departed, Harrison found himself alone with his son, who was studying the tactical map with intense concentration. "Your thoughts, Lieutenant Colonel?" Harrison asked formally. 7 against 4 is optimistic, considering what we know about Iraqi deployments, his son replied without looking up. "They'll have more like 5-1 odds in actual combat. Then we'd better make sure these tanks are up to the task." His son finally met his gaze. "Is that why you're here? To ensure the tanks are ready, or to relive your glory days?" The accusation stung, but Harrison kept his expression neutral. "I'm here because I was ordered here. Same as you. The difference is I requested a transfer and was denied. You could have said no." Harrison sighed. "Jimmy, don't call me that," his son cut him off sharply. "It's James or Lieutenant Colonel Harrison." Harrison felt the gulf between them widen further. "Lieutenant Colonel, whatever our personal history, we have a job to do. 16 men are under our command, and thousands more will depend on our evaluation. Can we at least agree to work together professionally?" His son's expression remained cold. "I'll do my duty, sir, as I always have." With that, he turned and left, his back straight, his steps measured. So like his father, and yet so determined to be different. Harrison stood alone in the command center, feeling the weight of command settling onto his shoulders once again. It wasn't just the mission that weighed on him. It was the knowledge that this might be his last chance to reach his son, his last chance to explain why duty had always called him away, even when his heart had wanted to stay. He moved to the window and watched as the tank crews began their equipment checks. The massive machines gleamed in the morning sun, beautiful in their lethal functionality. Harrison had spent his life in and around tanks, from the old M48 Pattons in his early days to the M60s he'd commanded in Vietnam. They had been his home, his office, his sanctuary. These new Abrams were different beasts entirely, faster, stronger, more complex. But at their core, they were still steel boxes filled with men and ammunition, and they would still be asked to do the impossible, to protect their crews while bringing overwhelming firepower to bear on the enemy. Harrison turned away from the window. He had work to do. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Harrison walked the line of tanks, watching the crews perform their maintenance routines. It was day 3 of training, and already he could see the teams taking shape, personalities emerging, strengths and weaknesses becoming apparent. Tank 1, his command tank, was crewed by steady, experienced men. His driver, Specialist David Chen, had 5 years' experience with the Abrams and hands that worked mechanical miracles. His gunner, Sergeant Paul Watson, had been an instructor at the armor school. And his loader, Corporal Miguel Ortiz, moved with the fluid efficiency that came from thousands of repetitions. Tank 2, under his son's command, was the most technically proficient. They executed every procedure by the book, with precision that bordered on the mechanical. Tank 3, led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, was more unorthodox. They improvised, found shortcuts, bent rules, but they got results. Tank 4, Lieutenant Peterson's tank, was the experimental unit. They tested the limits of the new systems, pushed the digital technology to its breaking point. Together, they were Chimera Squadron, an appropriate name, Harrison thought, for such a hybrid creation. "Colonel, a word?" Harrison turned to find Peterson approaching, a tablet computer in his hand. The lieutenant looked troubled. "What is it?" "I've been reviewing the mission parameters, sir. The test scenarios seem unusual." Harrison took the offered tablet and scrolled through the document. "Unusual how?" "They're all based on being outnumbered and outpositioned. Ambush scenarios, rear guard actions, fighting retreats. It's as if we're being set up to fail." Harrison handed the tablet back. "Or being prepared for the worst-case scenario, which is exactly what we should be training for." He studied Peterson's face. "Something else is bothering you, Lieutenant. What is it?" Peterson hesitated. "Sir, I've heard rumors that Colonel Zakharov requested this specific assignment, that he asked for us by name." "That was interesting. And why would he do that?" "I don't know, sir. But Zakharov isn't just any for commander. Before the thaw in relations, he was considered one of the Soviet Union's leading tank warfare theorists. He wrote their current doctrine on countering NATO armor." Harrison nodded slowly. Know your enemy, Lieutenant. I want everything we have on Zakharov and Red Thunder. Full histories, past exercises, preferred tactics, everything. Yes, sir. There's one more thing. Peterson seemed even more reluctant now. Your son and Zakharov have history. Harrison felt a cold trickle of apprehension. What kind of history? I don't know the details, sir, but they were both involved in the joint U.S.-Soviet technical exchange 3 years ago. Something happened, something that wasn't in the official reports. Before Harrison could press for more information, a commotion drew their attention to the far end of the tank line. Rodriguez was engaged in a heated argument with a female specialist Harrison recognized as Coleman, the systems tech. Problem, Sergeant? Harrison called as he approached. Rodriguez and Coleman snapped to attention. No problem, sir, Rodriguez said. Just a difference of professional opinion. About what? Coleman spoke up. The manual override systems, sir. Sergeant Rodriguez wants to modify them beyond spec. These override controls are too complicated, Rodriguez explained. In combat, if the digital system fails, we need to be able to transition to manual instantly. The current setup has too many steps. Harrison looked at Coleman. Your opinion, specialist? The system is designed with safety protocols to prevent accidental overrides, sir. Bypassing those protocols could lead to system instability. Harrison considered this. Show me. Inside Rodriguez's tank, the sergeant demonstrated the current override process. It required multiple confirmations in a specific sequence of commands. In combat with shells incoming and adrenaline pumping, this is going to get someone killed, Rodriguez insisted. Harrison had to agree. The procedure was designed by engineers who had never been under fire. What's your proposed modification, Sergeant? Rodriguez showed him a simple hardwired bypass switch he'd designed. One movement, foolproof. And potentially dangerous, Coleman interjected. It could damage the targeting system if engaged incorrectly. Harrison looked between them. Can you modify it to include a safety but maintain the single-action activation? Coleman considered this. I could add a protective cover that needs to be flipped up first. 2 motions, but still faster than the current system. Do it, Harrison ordered, for all 4 tanks. And keep me informed of any other practical modifications the crews suggest. The men who operate these machines often understand their real-world needs better than the designers. Coleman nodded, though she still seemed reluctant. Harrison made a mental note to watch the dynamic between the technical staff and the tank crews. That division could become problematic. As the day progressed, Harrison observed each crew's training exercises. The men were skilled, no doubt about that, but they relied too heavily on the advanced systems. Time to change that. All crews stand down and gather up, he ordered over the command net. When the 16 men had assembled, Harrison climbed onto the fender of his tank to address them. You're all experts with these machines when everything works as designed. But starting tomorrow, we're going to learn what happens when things go wrong. When the computers fail, when the thermal sights go dark, when you're fighting blind. A ripple of unease went through the group. Tank warfare isn't about who has the best technology. It's about who can adapt when that technology fails. The enemy gets a vote, gentlemen, and they'll be voting to destroy your fancy systems first. So we're going to practice fighting with those systems degraded or destroyed entirely. Sir, Peterson interjected, these tanks are designed with multiple redundancies. The likelihood of catastrophic system failure is extremely low. Is it, Lieutenant? Tell that to the crews of the M1s that lost power in the desert during training last year when sand fouled their air filters. Tell that to the men who discovered their thermal sights couldn't penetrate certain types of sandstorm conditions. In combat, anything that can fail will fail. Harrison looked each man in the eye. Starting tomorrow, we're going back to basics. Navigation by map and compass. Target acquisition by visual reference. Manual range finding. Artillery coordination without digital assistance. We're going to strip these tanks down to their bones and rebuild your understanding of them from the ground up. He could see resistance in some faces, particularly Peterson's, but also grudging acknowledgement from others, especially Rodriguez. Sergeant Rodriguez will develop the training program based on his combat experience. Lieutenant Peterson will ensure all safety protocols are followed. Specialist Coleman will monitor system performance during stress testing. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison will evaluate overall effectiveness. Harrison deliberately gave his son a substantive role, hoping to bridge the gap between them through professional respect. Questions? When there were none, he dismissed them. Get some rest. Tomorrow will test you in ways you haven't been tested before. As the men dispersed, Harrison noticed his son lingering, clearly wanting to speak privately. When the others had gone, he approached. "You disagree with my approach," Harrison stated, not a question. "These men are trained on the new systems. You're undermining their confidence in equipment they'll have to rely on in combat. I'm giving them alternatives for when those systems fail." His son's expression hardened. "This isn't Vietnam, Colonel. These aren't M60s. The world has moved on, even if you haven't." The words cut deep, but Harrison kept his voice level. "Technology changes, warfare doesn't. Men still fight, bleed, and die when their equipment fails them. I'm trying to prevent that by teaching them to distrust the very advantages that might keep them alive. By teaching them to trust themselves first, their technology second." They stood in the dying light, father and son, each believing he was right, neither willing to concede. The gulf between them was about more than tank tactics. It was about two generations of warfare, two philosophies of command, two approaches to life itself. "Your mother used to say you were just like me," Harrison said softly. "Stubborn, convinced of your own rightness." A flash of pain crossed his son's face at the mention of his mother. Don't use her to try to connect with me now." James, we need to talk about what happened." "No, we don't. It's done. She's gone, and you weren't there." Harrison felt the familiar ache in his chest. "I tried to get back. You know that. The storm grounded all flights. You shouldn't have left in the first place. The doctors told you she had days, maybe hours, but the Army called and off you went. She insisted I go. That meeting was about equipment that would save lives." "What about her life?" His son's voice cracked slightly. "What about being there for her final moments?" Harrison had no answer that would satisfy. Nothing that would erase the image of his son, alone with his dying mother watching the clock as his father failed to return in time. "I made a choice," Harrison finally said. "It was the wrong one. I've lived with that every day since." His son stared at him, years of pain and anger in his eyes. "So have I." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Harrison alone with the setting sun and the weight of his regrets. Later that night, unable to sleep, Harrison wandered to the tank yard. The massive machines sat silent under the stars, their armored hulls gleaming dully in the moonlight. He ran his hand along the smooth flank of his command tank, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. "We all make choices," he said to the empty night, "and we all pay for them." Harrison had chosen duty over family too many times to count. He'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, school plays. He'd been absent when his son took his first steps, said his first words, graduated high school. All for the mission, all for the men under his command. And Martha had understood. She'd been an Army wife through and through, proud of her husband's service, uncomplaining about the sacrifices. Until the end, when she'd insisted he attend that meeting at the Pentagon, even as the cancer was claiming her final hours. "Those men need you more than I do now," she'd said. But Jimmy hadn't understood, couldn't understand, and Harrison had never found the words to explain why some calls couldn't go unanswered, why some duties transcended even the most sacred personal obligations. "Sir, is everything all right?" Harrison turned to find Specialist Coleman approaching, a clipboard in her hand. "Just checking on my tank, Specialist. What has you up at this hour?" "Running diagnostics on the override modifications, sir. Sergeant Rodriguez's idea was sound, but the implementation needed some refinement." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good initiative. How are you finding the rest of the team?" Coleman seemed to choose her words carefully. "They're all highly qualified, sir. Different approaches, but equally effective in their own way." "But," Harrison prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But there are tensions. Lieutenant Peterson believes strongly in the new systems. Sergeant Rodriguez distrusts them. And Lieutenant Colonel Harrison? Yes, he seems caught in the middle. He understands the technology, but he also appreciates Rodriguez's practical experience." Harrison considered this. His son had always been adaptable, able to see multiple perspectives. It was what had made him a good officer. "And what about you, Specialist? Where do you stand?" Coleman straightened slightly. "I believe in the systems I help maintain, sir. But I also believe in preparing for their failure. No technology is infallible." Harrison smiled slightly. "A sensible position? Have you served in combat, Coleman?" "Desert Storm will be my first deployment, sir, assuming we get there." "And you're ready for that?" She met his gaze steadily. "As ready as anyone can be without having experienced it, sir." Harrison appreciated her honesty. "Get some sleep, Specialist. Tomorrow will be challenging for all of us." After she left, Harrison remained with the tanks a while longer. In the distance, the lights of the main base glowed against the night sky. Thousands of soldiers were preparing for war, many of them young men and women like Coleman. Some would not return. It was the eternal calculus of command, weighing the cost in lives against the objectives to be gained. Harrison had made those calculations throughout his career. He'd sent men to their deaths knowing the mission required it. He'd lived with the consequences, carried the weight of those decisions, and now, approaching the end of his service, he faced perhaps the most consequential decision of all: whether these new tanks were truly ready to protect America's sons and daughters in battle. He couldn't afford to be wrong. Not with so many lives at stake. Not with his own son's life potentially among them. Harrison turned back toward the barracks, his resolve hardening. Whatever personal pain he carried, whatever bridges needed mending with his son, the mission came first. It always had. The next morning dawned with a red sun rising over the distant hills. Harrison stood before the assembled tank crews who looked wary after his pronouncement the previous day. "Today we begin real training," he announced. "Lieutenant Peterson, explain the exercise." Peterson stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We'll be conducting a degraded systems drill. Each tank will enter the course with progressive system failures simulated. First targeting computers, then thermals, then communications. You'll need to locate and engage targets using backup systems only." Harrison watched the men's reactions. Some looked nervous, others determined. His son's face was unreadable. "One more thing," Harrison added. "You'll be conducting the entire exercise buttoned up. No open hatches, no visual reference except through your periscopes and sights." This elicited several concerned murmurs. Fighting buttoned up was notoriously difficult, reducing visibility and situational awareness dramatically. "Questions?" Harrison asked. Rodriguez raised his hand. "Rules of engagement, sir? Find the targets, engage the targets. Don't hit friendly forces, simple as that." "And what happens when our systems fail completely?" asked one of Peterson's crew. Harrison smiled grimly. "Then you improvise, adapt, and overcome, soldier. Just like you would in combat." The exercise that followed was brutal. One by one, the tanks entered the course, a complex maze of ravines and ridgelines designed to simulate the Iraqi desert. And one by one, their systems failed as Coleman remotely disabled them from the command center. Peterson's tank performed the worst, becoming effectively combat ineffective when their primary systems went down. They failed to engage any targets and accidentally crossed into a simulated minefield. Rodriguez's crew fared better, relying on the sergeant's experience and their own improvisation. They managed to engage 3 of the 5 targets despite having only basic functionality. Harrison's son and his crew performed surprisingly well, adapting quickly to the degraded systems and maintaining discipline throughout. They engaged 4 targets and avoided all hazards. Harrison's own crew, led by his example, completed the course with all 5 targets engaged and 0 penalties. It wasn't surprising. Harrison had trained extensively in the old M60s, which had none of the advanced systems these men took for granted. The after-action review was tense. Peterson was clearly frustrated, his crew embarrassed by their poor showing. This exercise was deliberately designed to make the new systems appear unreliable, Peterson argued. "It doesn't reflect realistic combat conditions." "Doesn't it?" Harrison countered. "Enemy forces will specifically target your electronic systems with jamming, EMP effects, and physical damage. You need to be prepared for that reality." "With all due respect, sir, the statistical likelihood of catastrophic system failure is—" "Statistics won't save you on the battlefield, Lieutenant," Harrison interrupted. "Men will. Men who know how to fight when everything goes to hell." Harrison turned to address the entire group. "Today showed us our vulnerabilities. Now we'll strengthen them. Each crew will rotate through basic skills training, manual range finding, visual target identification, terrain navigation, emergency repairs. By the time we face Red Thunder, you'll be able to fight these tanks if every circuit board burns out." As the men dispersed to their assigned training stations, Harrison noticed Coleman deep in conversation with his son. Their heads were bent close together over a tablet, and both looked concerned. "Problem?" Harrison asked as he approached. They straightened quickly, almost guiltily. Coleman spoke first. "Just reviewing the system failure data, sir. There were some anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" His son answered. "The systems didn't fail randomly as they were supposed to. There was a pattern, almost as if someone was testing specific vulnerabilities." Harrison frowned. "Explain." Coleman tapped her tablet. "When we design failure scenarios, we randomize them to simulate combat damage. But today's failures targeted very specific subsystems in a specific sequence, like someone was probing for a particular weakness. Could it have been a glitch in the test program? Possible, sir, Coleman said, though she didn't sound convinced, but unlikely. Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I want a full security check on all our systems, and keep this between us for now. No need to alarm the men. After Coleman left to begin the security sweep, Harrison turned to his son. Your thoughts? If someone is probing our systems, they're looking for exploitable weaknesses. The question is who and why. Harrison nodded. Zakharov. Maybe, but why would OPFOR need to hack our systems? They already know what scenarios we'll be facing. Unless they're planning something that isn't in the official test parameters. His son considered this. I'll speak with some of my contacts, see what they know about Red Thunder's recent activities. Harrison was surprised by the offer of help. Thank you. An awkward silence fell between them, neither man knowing how to bridge the personal gulf while maintaining professional distance. Your crew performed well today, Harrison finally said. You've trained them thoroughly. They're good men. They deserve better than being caught in the middle of... Of what? His son met his gaze directly. Whatever is going on here, this isn't just about testing tanks for deployment. There's something else happening, and I want to know what it is before my men get hurt. Harrison recognized the protective instinct of a good commander. It was something they shared, perhaps the only thing they still had in common. I'll find out, Harrison promised. In the meantime, keep your eyes open and your crew ready. His son nodded once, then left to rejoin his men, his back straight, his stride purposeful. In that moment, he looked so much like the young officer Harrison had once been. It made his heart ache with pride and regret in equal measure. The day continued with intensive training. Harrison drove his men hard, pushing them beyond what they thought were their limits. By sunset, they were exhausted but showing marked improvement in basic skills. As darkness fell, Harrison made his way to the command center to check on Coleman's security sweep. He found the specialist surrounded by computer screens, her face illuminated by their blue glow. What have you found? He asked without preamble. Evidence of intrusion, sir. Someone accessed our training protocols and modified the failure scenarios. They also pulled data on our tank's electronic architecture. Can you trace it? Not definitively, but the access point was on base. She looked up at him, her expression troubled. Someone with high-level clearance and intimate knowledge of our systems. Harrison absorbed this. Keep digging and set up a separate, secure communication channel for our team only. I don't want anyone outside Chimera Squadron knowing our movements or plans. Yes, sir. There's one more thing. Coleman hesitated. I found a name in the access logs. It was hidden, but I managed to recover it. Whose name? Lieutenant William Peterson, sir. Harrison felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Are you certain? The credentials were his. Whether he used them himself or someone else did, I can't say for sure. Harrison considered his options. Peterson had been vocal about his disagreement with Harrison's training methods. He also had a prior relationship with Zakharov. But was he a security risk? Keep this to yourself for now, Harrison ordered. Continue monitoring, but don't confront Peterson. I need more information before I make any decisions. Yes, sir. As Harrison left the command center, his mind raced with implications. If Peterson was compromised, the entire mission could be at risk. But accusing an officer of such serious misconduct without irrefutable proof would end the lieutenant's career. Harrison's musings were interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. 3 Humvees were pulling into the compound, bearing the insignia of division headquarters. From the lead vehicle emerged a tall, lean man with silver hair and the eagles of a full colonel on his collar. Harrison recognized him immediately from the briefing photos. Viktor Zakharov, commander of Red Thunder. The enemy had arrived. Zakharov spotted Harrison and approached, hand extended. Colonel Harrison, the legendary Steel Eagle, it is an honor to finally meet you. Harrison took the offered hand. Zakharov's grip was firm, his accent barely noticeable after years in America. Colonel Zakharov, welcome to our humble testing grounds. Zakharov smiled, his eyes sharp and assessing. Not so humble. I understand you have the very latest version of the Abrams. Most impressive. We make do with what we're given, Harrison replied neutrally. Zakharov's smile widened. As do we all. I look forward to seeing how your tanks perform against my T-52s. So do I. They stood measuring each other, 2 old warriors from opposite sides of a long Cold War. I understand you fought in Vietnam, Zakharov said conversationally. A Shao Valley 1972, 3 tanks against 12. Most impressive. Harrison felt a prickle of unease that Zakharov knew such specific details of his combat record. Ancient history. Not so ancient. I was in North Vietnam that same year as an advisor. Zakharov's eyes never left Harrison's. Perhaps our paths crossed without us knowing. The implication hung in the air between them. Had Zakharov been advising the very T-55 unit Harrison had faced? The unit that had killed his best friend? Before Harrison could respond, his son appeared at his side. Colonel Zakharov, I see you've met my father. Zakharov's expression changed subtly as he turned to the younger Harrison. Lieutenant Colonel, it has been some time. Not long enough, Harrison's son replied, his voice cold. Zakharov chuckled. Still the same firebrand. How nice that you get to serve under your father's command. A family reunion of sorts. Is there something you needed, Colonel? The joint briefing isn't scheduled until tomorrow. Merely paying my respects to a legend. Zakharov turned back to Harrison. Your son and I worked together briefly during the technical exchange program. He has a brilliant mind, though perhaps not as strategic as yours. I'm sure he held his own, Harrison said, surprised to find himself defending his son. Oh, indeed, though we had our disagreements, professional and personal. Zakharov smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll leave you to your preparations. Until tomorrow, gentlemen. As Zakharov returned to his vehicles, Harrison turned to his son. What was that about? What happened between you two? It's not relevant to the mission. It seems relevant to him. His son's jaw clenched. Zakharov was developing a targeting system designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in American armor. I discovered it and reported it. He was removed from the exchange program. And the personal disagreement? Like I said, not relevant. Harrison could see he wouldn't get more information now. Keep your distance from him. I don't trust his sudden appearance here. That makes two of us. As Red Thunder's vehicles drove away, Harrison watched his son's expression. There was history there, deep and complex. Another piece of his son's life that he knew nothing about. Another reminder of all he had missed while serving his country. That night, as the compound settled into silence, Harrison sat in his quarters reviewing the day's training data. A knock at his door surprised him. Enter, he called. Peterson stepped into the room, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. Sir, may I speak with you privately? Harrison set aside his tablet. Of course, Lieutenant. Peterson closed the door. Sir, I need to clear something up. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my relationship with Colonel Zakharov. Harrison kept his face impassive. What makes you think there's a misunderstanding? The way you looked at me when he arrived, and the security sweep of our systems. Peterson met his gaze directly. I'm not a security risk, sir. Yes, I knew Zakharov during the exchange program. Many of us did. But my loyalty is to this unit and this mission. Harrison studied the younger man. Either Peterson was an exceptional actor, or he was genuinely concerned about his commander's trust. Someone accessed our systems using your credentials, Lieutenant. Can you explain that? Peterson's surprise seemed genuine. No, sir, I can't. My credentials are secured. I haven't shared them with anyone. Could they have been compromised? It's possible. During the exchange program, our systems were more open than they should have been. Security wasn't as tight as it is now. Harrison considered this. What's your assessment of Zakharov, professionally speaking? Peterson thought carefully before answering. Brilliant, dedicated, ruthless when necessary. He sees tank warfare as a chess match, with men as pieces to be sacrificed for position. And his interest in our new Abrams? Very high. He believes the future of armored warfare depends on defeating our technological advantage. He used to say that for every system, there's a counter system. For every advantage, a vulnerability to exploit. Harrison nodded slowly. Thank you for your candor, Lieutenant. I appreciate you coming to me directly. Peterson seemed relieved. Thank you for hearing me out, sir. I know we've had our differences regarding training methods, but I want you to know I respect your experience. I just believe there's room for both old school tactics and new technology. Perhaps you're right, Harrison conceded. We'll see how both approaches fare against Red Thunder. After Peterson left, Harrison sat in thought. The lieutenant's explanation was plausible, and yet something still didn't feel right. Zakharov's appearance, the system intrusion, his son's mysterious history with the Russian officer all suggested pieces of a larger puzzle. Harrison reached for his secure phone and dialed a number from memory. It was time to call in some favors from old friends at the Pentagon. If there was more to this mission than he'd been told, he needed to know before his men faced Red Thunder in the field. As he waited for the call to connect, Harrison gazed out his window at the tanks silhouetted against the night sky. In those armored beasts, soon to face their first true test, rode the lives of his men, the future of American armor, and perhaps his last chance to heal the rift with his only son. The stakes could hardly be higher. And as any tanker knows, when the stakes are high, you check your ammunition, trust your crew, and prepare for battle. Because once the shooting starts, there's no going back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds as James Harrison watched his men prepare their tanks for the day's exercises. 6 days had passed since Zakharov's unexpected visit, 6 days of intensive training that had transformed Chimera Squadron from a collection of individuals into something approaching a cohesive unit. Harrison stood on a small rise, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his keen eyes missing nothing. Tank 1, his command vehicle, was already operational, its massive turbine engine sending a low, powerful thrum through the ground beneath his feet. Sergeant Watson was performing the final weapons check, his movements economical and precise. Tank 2, under his son's command, was similarly prepared. Harrison felt a small surge of pride seeing James Jr. standing tall in the turret, directing his crew with quiet authority. Whatever their personal differences, his son was a fine officer. Tank 3, Rodriguez's vehicle, was still undergoing final checks, the sergeant's voice carrying across the yard as he berated his crew for some minor infraction. Rodriguez was old school, demanding and uncompromising, but his men would be ready when it mattered. Tank 4 troubled Harrison. Peterson's crew was skilled, no doubt about that, but they lacked the cohesion of the others. Too reliant on technology, too confident in their advanced systems. Harrison made a mental note to focus more attention there in the coming days. Impressive, aren't they? The voice came from behind him. Harrison turned to find General Mitchell approaching, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. "They're getting there," Harrison replied, unwilling to express too much confidence yet. Mitchell smiled. "Always the perfectionist. That's why I wanted you for this." The two men stood in silence for a moment, watching the activity below. "Any word on the security breach?" Mitchell finally asked, his voice low. Harrison had reported the system intrusion immediately after discovering it. "Nothing conclusive. Someone accessed our training protocols using Peterson's credentials. But we haven't determined if it was him or someone impersonating him." "And your assessment of the lieutenant?" Harrison considered his words carefully. "He's brilliant, dedicated. But his history with Zakharov concerns me." "Zakharov." Mitchell's expression darkened. "I never liked that assignment. Too many risks, not enough safeguards." "Why is he here, Frank? Why now, when we're testing critical systems for deployment?" Mitchell sighed. "Officially, because Red Thunder is our most capable OPFOR unit. Unofficially?" He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "There are factions in the Pentagon that don't want the Abrams deployed to the Gulf. Budget hawks, political appointees with their own agendas. They're looking for any excuse to delay." "And Zakharov?" "He's retiring next month. Returning to Russia. This is his last command." Harrison absorbed this information. A last chance to prove his theories about defeating American armor. Possibly. Or simply a final assignment before he collects his pension. Mitchell fixed Harrison with a serious gaze. "Either way, your job remains the same. Evaluate these tanks honestly. If they're ready, say so. If not, say that too. Lives depend on it." "Understood." After Mitchell departed, Harrison descended to the tank yard. The day's training would be particularly grueling, operating in a simulated chemical environment, with crews in full NBC protective gear, vision restricted, communications hampered by the masks. As he approached his tank, he found Specialist Coleman waiting for him, tablet in hand. "Sir, I have that data you requested," she said, her expression carefully neutral. Harrison nodded. "Walk with me." They moved a short distance away, out of earshot of the crews. "What did you find?" Coleman glanced down at her tablet. "I traced the system intrusion further. It wasn't just Peterson's credentials that were used. There were additional access attempts using Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's codes as well." Harrison felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Successfully?" "No, sir. Your son's security protocols are more robust. The attempts failed." Harrison processed this. "Any pattern to what they were trying to access?" "Yes, sir. The fire control systems, specifically the targeting algorithms that compensate for range, wind, and vehicle movement. Whoever it was wanted to know exactly how our tanks acquire and engage targets." "Zakharov," Harrison muttered. "He's looking for weaknesses to exploit." "There's more, sir." Coleman hesitated. I found evidence of communication between our base network and an outside server. Data packets containing our training scenarios, crew rotations, and system specifications were transmitted 3 days ago. Can you trace the destination? Not precisely, but the routing suggests it was somewhere on base, possibly Red Thunder's command center. Harrison's jaw tightened. They were being compromised, their every move potentially known to the enemy before they made it. He needed to change the equation, and fast. Specialist, I have a special assignment for you, off the books. Coleman Strahan. Yes, sir? I want you to create a shadow system, duplicate our entire command and control network, but isolated, accessible only by Chimera Squadron. Make it look like we're continuing to operate on the main system, but actually run everything through your parallel network. That would require significant resources and authorization, sir. You'll have both. Harrison handed her a sealed envelope. General Mitchell's authorization and the access codes you'll need. This comes from the top. Coleman took the envelope, her expression shifting from uncertainty to resolve. I'll need at least 48 hours, sir. You have 24. We face Red Thunder in a preliminary engagement the day after tomorrow. Understood, sir. I won't let you down. As Coleman departed, Harrison turned back to the tanks. His men were boarding now, preparing for the day's exercise. Whatever game Zakharov was playing, Harrison intended to change the rules. Inside the stifling confines of his tank, Harrison adjusted his protective mask and chemical suit. The NBC gear was necessary in the event of chemical or biological warfare, but it made an already cramped space nearly unbearable. Vision was restricted to narrow eye ports, communication reduced to muffled voices through mask filters, and every movement hampered by the bulky protective clothing. All stations report, Harrison ordered into his mask microphone. Driver ready, came Chen's response, his voice barely recognizable. Gunner ready, Watson reported. Loader ready, Ortiz confirmed. Harrison keyed his radio to the squadron frequency. All tanks, sound off. One by one, the other three commanders reported their status. All were sealed in their metal beasts, prepared to navigate and fight in conditions designed to simulate the worst-case scenario in Iraq. Today's exercise simulates combat operations in a contaminated environment, Harrison explained. Full chemical protection protocols are in effect. We will navigate to Objective Baker, engage simulated enemy forces, and withdraw to a decontamination point. Communications may be jammed. Visibility will be poor. You will need to rely on your training and each other. He paused, then added, remember, in the Gulf, chemical weapons are a real threat. This isn't just an exercise. It's preparation for what you may actually face. With that, Harrison ordered the squadron forward. The four tanks rumbled into motion, advancing toward a series of low hills that marked the beginning of the training area. Inside his command tank, Harrison felt the familiar vibration through his boots, heard the powerful turbine engine driving them forward. Despite the restrictions of his protective gear, Harrison felt a strange comfort in the tank's interior. These armored beasts had been his home for much of his professional life. He understood their rhythms, their capabilities, their limitations in a way that went beyond technical specifications or performance data. It was an intuitive knowledge born of years spent in combat, facing death inside these steel coffins. The tanks moved in formation across the broken terrain, maintaining proper spacing and security. Harrison noted with approval how his son's tank took the lead position, navigating skillfully through a particularly difficult stretch of ground. Rodriguez's tank provided overwatch from a slight elevation, while Peterson's vehicle guarded the rear. They were learning, adapting, becoming a true tank platoon. The first challenge came at a narrow pass between two hills. As they approached, Harrison's radio crackled with interference. All stations, prepare for communications discipline. We're being jammed. As if on cue, the radios went silent, filled with static and electronic noise. Now the tanks would need to rely on visual signals and pre-planned maneuvers to coordinate their movements. Harrison ordered his driver to halt in a position where he could observe the entire squadron. He popped his hatch despite the simulated chemical environment, needing better visibility to command effectively. Through his mask's eye ports, he saw his son doing the same from the lead tank, using hand signals to direct the formation through the pass. It was well executed. The tanks moved in sequence, each covering the others as they navigated the vulnerable position. Harrison felt a surge of pride. This was proper tank tactics, the kind that had won battles since armored warfare began. As they emerged from the pass, artificial smoke canisters detonated around them, reducing visibility to near zero. This was the next phase of the test, target acquisition in obscured conditions. Harrison dropped back into his tank, sealing the hatch. Gunner, activate thermal imaging. Thermal imaging activated, Watson confirmed. But there's interference, sir, not getting clear returns. Harrison wasn't surprised. The test designers had likely included metallic particles in the smoke to confuse thermal systems. Another worst-case scenario to overcome. Switch to conventional optics. Use ranging lasers to find targets through the smoke. The tank's interior was filled with the soft hum of servo motors as the turret traversed, the guns searching for targets hidden in the artificial murk. Harrison watched the main screen, looking for the telltale silhouettes of enemy vehicles. Contact, 2 o'clock, 800 meters, Watson reported. Target identified as hostile T-72. Confirm target, Harrison ordered, following protocol even in a training exercise. Target confirmed. T-72 stationary broadside aspect. Engage. Watson fired the simulated round, the computer registering the shot and calculating impact. Target destroyed, he reported. Similar reports came in from the other tanks as they engaged their own targets. 7 simulated T-72s, all dispatched with professional efficiency. Harrison nodded in satisfaction. Despite the challenging conditions, his squadron was performing admirably. But the real test was yet to come. As they approached Objective Baker, Harrison sensed something was wrong. The scenario called for a defended position with multiple enemy tanks and infantry. But as they crested the final rise, his thermal imaging showed nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. The objective appeared abandoned. Harrison keyed his microphone, but only static responded. The jamming had intensified. Driver, halt, he ordered. Gunner, full sweep, all sectors. The turret rotated slowly as Watson scanned the surroundings. Nothing. Harrison popped his hatch again, using binoculars to survey the terrain. The other 3 tanks had also halted, their commanders similarly searching for the missing enemy. And then he saw it, a glint of metal in the morning sun from a position that shouldn't have contained any targets. The distinctive shape of a T-72 turret, partially concealed in a drainage culvert 300 meters to their right flank. This wasn't part of the scenario. These were live op-for elements positioned to ambush them as they focused on the objective. Zakharov had changed the rules of engagement. Harrison dropped back into his tank, heart pounding. Gunner, traverse right, drainage culvert at 3 o'clock, 300 meters. Target is T-72, partially concealed. Sir, that's outside the exercise boundaries, Watson objected. It's a real target, not simulated. Red Thunder is setting up an ambush. Watson hesitated only briefly before traversing the gun. Target acquired. Hold fire, Harrison ordered. Driver, reverse to hold down position behind the rise. As his tank backed up to a protected position, Harrison considered his options. His squadron was scattered across exposed ground, facing unknown numbers of concealed enemies, with no communications. A textbook ambush situation. Harrison made a quick decision. Standing in his turret, he fired a red signal flare, the emergency recall signal. It arced high into the sky, visible to all his tanks despite the smoke. The response was immediate. His son's tank immediately began backing toward a defensive position. Rodriguez's vehicle was already moving to higher ground for better fields of fire. Only Peterson's tank seemed slow to react, still focused on the original objective. Before Harrison could fire a second flare, the world erupted in chaos. Smoke canisters detonated around Peterson's tank, completely obscuring it. From multiple concealed positions, T-72s from Red Thunder opened fire with laser designators that simulated main gun rounds. The exercise had just turned deadly serious. Harrison dropped back into his tank. Gunner engaged that T-72 in the culvert. Driver advanced to support position covering Tank 4. His crew responded instantly. The 120mm main gun roared symbolically as the simulation computer registered their fire. Meanwhile, Chen expertly maneuvered their massive vehicle down the slope toward Peterson's endangered tank. Through the smoke, Harrison could see the situation developing. 3 T-72s had emerged from concealed positions, focusing their fire on the isolated Tank 4. Their laser designators were painting Peterson's vehicle repeatedly, the computer undoubtedly registering multiple fatal hits. But Peterson wasn't surrendering. His turret was traversing wildly, attempting to acquire targets through the enveloping smoke. Harrison had to admire the lieutenant's tenacity, even as he recognized the futility of his position. All tanks, converge on Tank 4. Harrison ordered, forgetting momentarily that radio communications were jammed. He fired another flare, this one green rally signal. His son understood immediately. Tank 2 began a flanking maneuver, using terrain to shield its approach toward Peterson's position. Rodriguez's Tank 3 was already engaging one of the ambushing T-72s from elevated ground, the simulation computer likely registering successful hits. As Harrison's tank neared Peterson's position, he could see the lieutenant standing in his turret, mask removed despite the simulated chemical environment, shouting orders to his crew. It was a breach of protocol, but Harrison understood the desperate need for clear communication in the chaos. A sudden movement caught Harrison's eye. Another T-72, previously undetected, was maneuvering behind a low ridge, attempting to circle behind Peterson. It was textbook Soviet tactics: separate, isolate, destroy. Gunner, new target, T-72 behind the ridge at our 10 o'clock. Watson traversed the gun smoothly. Target acquired. Fire. The computer registered another hit. One more threat neutralized. Harrison's tank finally reached Peterson's position. Lieutenant, withdraw behind us, Harrison shouted across the short distance between their vehicles. We'll cover you. Peterson nodded gratefully, dropping back into his turret. His tank began backing away from the killing zone, protected now by Harrison's armored bulk. The skirmish continued for several more minutes. Rodriguez's elevated position proved decisive, allowing him to engage multiple targets while remaining relatively protected. Harrison's son executed a brilliant flanking maneuver that caught two of Red Thunder's tanks exposed and vulnerable. By the time the exercise controllers finally called a halt, Chimera Squadron had regained the initiative, despite the surprise ambush. It wasn't a clear victory. Zakharov's forces had inflicted significant simulated damage on Peterson's tank and moderate hits on the others, but it was far from the one-sided destruction the Russian had likely planned. As the smoke cleared and the jamming ceased, Harrison emerged from his tank to survey the battlefield. Red Thunder's T-72s were withdrawing, their commanders visible in their turrets. And there, standing atop the lead vehicle, was Viktor Zakharov himself, binoculars trained directly on Harrison. Even at this distance, Harrison could imagine the calculating expression on the Russian's face. This hadn't been just a training exercise, it had been a test, a probing action to assess Chimera Squadron's capabilities and Harrison's command style. And now Zakharov knew that Harrison wouldn't be easily ambushed or outmaneuvered. The real contest was just beginning. Back at the Chimera Squadron compound, the after-action review was intense. Maps and tactical displays covered the walls of the command center, and the air was thick with tension as the tank commanders gathered around the central table. It was a deliberate ambush, Peterson insisted, still visibly agitated. They changed the parameters without notification. They were waiting for us. Of course they were, Rodriguez countered. That's what OB4 does. They're supposed to challenge us, not follow a script. Harrison's son had been quiet until now, studying the terrain model with focused concentration. The issue isn't that they ambushed us. It's how they knew exactly where to position their forces for maximum effect. They anticipated our approach route perfectly. Harrison nodded in agreement. They had our playbook, our communications, our planned movements, possibly even our individual tank assignments. Coleman, who had been monitoring the exercise remotely, spoke up from her position at the computer station. The jamming was also suspiciously effective. It didn't just block our communications, it selectively allowed certain frequencies while blocking others. They could talk to each other while we couldn't. Harrison considered this. Specialist Coleman has been investigating a security breach in our systems. It appears Red Thunder may have accessed our training protocols and tactical plans. That's cheating, Peterson said flatly. That's warfare, Harrison corrected him. The enemy will never fight fair. They'll use every advantage, exploit every weakness, break every rule they can get away with. Our job is to be ready for that reality. He turned to the tactical display. Today showed us several things. First, our current communications are vulnerable to sophisticated jamming. Second, our standard approach tactics are too predictable. And third, he looked directly at Peterson. We rely too heavily on technology that can be defeated. Peterson bristled, but said nothing. But we also learned that this squadron has potential, Harrison continued. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's flanking maneuver was textbook. Sergeant Rodriguez's use of elevated firing positions kept the enemy off balance. And Lieutenant Peterson, despite being the primary target, kept his tank operational and his crew together under extreme pressure. Harrison saw the surprised looks on their faces. They had expected criticism, not praise. We lost today, gentlemen. Let's acknowledge that. But we lost less badly than Zakharov expected. And now we adapt. We change our tactics, secure our communications, and prepare to give Red Thunder a surprise of their own. The meeting continued with detailed analysis of the engagement and planning for revised tactics. Harrison assigned Coleman to accelerate the development of the secure shadow network. Rodriguez would train all crews in enhanced visual communication techniques for when radio failed. Peterson would analyze the jamming patterns to identify exploitable gaps. And Harrison's son would develop new, unpredictable movement techniques that would make ambushes more difficult to execute. As the meeting broke up, Harrison noticed Peterson lingering, clearly wanting to speak privately. When the others had gone, the lieutenant approached. "Sir, I owe you an apology, and my thanks. You saved my tank out there today." Harrison nodded. "We're a squadron, Lieutenant. We look out for each other." "Yes, sir, but I've been—" Peterson seemed to search for the right words. "I've been resistant to your methods. I thought my technical expertise was more valuable than your experience. Today proved me wrong." "It's not about one being more valuable than the other," Harrison said. "It's about combining them. Your technical knowledge is essential, but so is the experience of men like Rodriguez, who've faced enemies trying to kill them for real." Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that now." He hesitated, then added, "Sir, about Zakharov, there's something you should know." Harrison's interest sharpened. "Go on." During the exchange program, he was working on a specific countermeasure against Abrams tanks, a jamming system designed to disrupt our fire control computers at the moment of firing. It would introduce subtle errors in the ballistic calculations, causing shots to miss by small but critical margins. And was this system deployed? It was still in development when the program ended, but Peterson frowned. The jamming pattern today had similarities to what he was developing then. Harrison absorbed this information. "Could you recognize this system if it were used against us?" "Possibly. It has a distinctive electronic signature. Work with Coleman. See if you can develop a countermeasure." "Yes, sir." Peterson straightened. "And sir, it won't happen again. My tank being caught exposed like that." "See that it doesn't, Lieutenant. Next time it might not be a training exercise." After Peterson left, Harrison remained in the command center, reviewing the day's events. The squadron had performed better than he expected, adapting quickly to the surprise ambush. But they were still vulnerable, still predictable in too many ways. And Zakharov was a dangerous opponent, one who had demonstrated his willingness to bend the rules to win. The Russians' tactics today had been aggressive, even reckless by training standards. In a real combat situation, such maneuvers would risk friendly casualties from friendly fire or collateral damage. It suggested a man willing to accept losses to achieve victory, a concerning quality in an opponent. Harrison's musings were interrupted by the arrival of his son, who entered the command center carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering one to his father. Harrison accepted it with surprise. It was the first genuinely friendly gesture his son had made since their reunion. "Thanks." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both men unsure how to navigate this small opening in the walls between them. "Your flanking maneuver today was impressive," Harrison finally said. "Exactly the right response to the situation." His son nodded. "I had a good teacher. Your tactics against the NVA at Quang Tri were required reading at the armor school." Harrison felt a small surge of pride. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know," his son replied, but without the usual edge in his voice. "About me, about Mom, about what happened after you left for that last deployment." Harrison set down his coffee cup. "I'd like to know, if you're willing to tell me." His son stared into his own cup for a long moment. "She didn't just die, Dad. She fought. Harder than anyone the doctors had ever seen. She had the nurses set up a map in her room tracking your location. 'My husband is saving lives,' she would tell them. 'I need to hold on until he gets back.'" Harrison felt his throat tighten. "When the storm hit and your flight was grounded, she made me promise something." His son's voice cracked slightly. "She made me promise to tell you it wasn't your fault, that she understood why you had to go, that she was proud of you." "Jimmy, I didn't tell you. For 7 years I didn't tell you because I was angry, because I needed someone to blame, because it was easier to be angry at you than to accept that sometimes there are no good choices, only impossible ones." Harrison reached across the table and placed his hand on his son's arm. "I should have been there." "Yes, you should have," his son agreed. "But she knew who she married. She knew what the job required, better than I did, maybe." They sat in silence again. But it was different now. The air between them felt clearer. The invisible barrier thinned, if not broken entirely. "There's something else you should know," his son said finally, "about Zakharov." Harrison waited, sensing the importance of what was coming. "During the exchange program, I discovered he was collecting detailed technical data on our Abrams tanks. Not just the performance specifications he was authorized to have, but vulnerability assessments, maintenance weaknesses, electronic countermeasure susceptibilities." "You reported him?" "Yes, and he was removed from the program. But before he left, he told me something." His son's expression darkened. He said that one day American and Russian tanks would face each other in battle, and when that day came, he would remember those who had interfered with his work. Harrison understood now. "He requested this assignment because of you. This is personal for him." "I believe so, yes. He wants to prove his theories about defeating the Abrams, and he wants to humiliate me in the process." Harrison considered this. "Then we'll have to disappoint him on both counts." For the first time since their reunion, his son smiled. It was small and fleeting, but real. "That's the plan, sir." As his son rose to leave, Harrison called after him, "Jimmy, James, thank you for telling me about your mother." His son paused at the door. "She loved you, Dad. Despite everything, she never stopped loving you." With that, he was gone, leaving Harrison alone with memories and regrets. The following days were a flurry of activity as Chimera Squadron prepared for their full-scale engagement against Red Thunder. Coleman worked tirelessly on the secure communications network, often going without sleep to ensure its completion. Peterson and his crew drilled relentlessly on manual targeting and firing procedures, determined not to be caught vulnerable again. Rodriguez's tank perfected rapid deployment tactics from hull-down positions, maximizing their protection while maintaining offensive capabilities. And Harrison's son developed an entirely new movement doctrine, one that emphasized unpredictability and mutual support over traditional formations. Harrison himself focused on integrating these separate efforts into a cohesive whole. He ran the squadron through increasingly complex scenarios, deliberately introducing equipment failures, communications breakdowns, and unexpected enemy actions. Each time, the men adapted more quickly, relied on each other more effectively. They were becoming what Harrison had hoped for, a tank squadron capable of facing any challenge, technological or tactical. The night before the full engagement, Harrison called his commanders together for a final briefing. The atmosphere in the command center was tense but focused. These men had transformed in the past 2 weeks from individual specialists into a coordinated fighting unit. "Tomorrow we face Red Thunder in force," Harrison began. 7 T-72s against our 4 Abrams. The exercise parameters call for us to seize and hold objective granite against determined opposition. He indicated the objective on the tactical map, a commanding piece of high ground overlooking a broad valley. Conventional wisdom would have us approach from the east, using these ridgelines for cover. Harrison traced the standard attack route on the map. "That's exactly what Zakharov will expect. So we're going to do something he won't expect." Harrison outlined the plan his son had developed. A night approach through terrain considered impassable for tanks, followed by an attack from an unexpected direction at first light. It was audacious, risky, and if executed properly, potentially decisive. "Sir, that approach takes us through Hell's Canyon," Peterson objected, indicating a narrow defile on the map. "The terrain reports classify it as non-navigable for armored vehicles." "The reports are based on satellite imagery and topographic mapping," Harrison's son replied. "But I had specialist Coleman run a ground-penetrating radar scan of the area yesterday. There's a dry stream bed running the length of the canyon. It's narrow, but our Abrams can make it if we proceed in single file." "It's still a huge risk," Peterson insisted. "If we get stuck, or if they're waiting for us," "which is why we'll have a diversion," Harrison said. "Coleman has programmed our old communications protocols to simulate a full squadron approach along the expected eastern route. Thermal decoys will provide heat signatures. Zakharov will position his forces to counter that threat while we're actually approaching from the west." Rodriguez grinned. "Sneaky, I like it." "It's unorthodox," Peterson admitted. "But if it works, it will work," Harrison's son said with quiet confidence. "But only if we execute perfectly. The canyon passage has to be completed in total darkness. No lights, minimal communications, precise intervals between vehicles." Harrison nodded. "It's a challenging maneuver, but this squadron is ready for it. Questions?" There were numerous technical and tactical details to clarify, which the men did with professional thoroughness. By the time the briefing concluded, everyone understood their role in the complex operation. As they prepared to depart for a few hours of rest before the pre-dawn start, Harrison addressed them one last time. Gentlemen, tomorrow isn't just another training exercise. It's a validation of everything we've worked toward these past 2 weeks. Zakharov believes he has our measure. He believes American tanks and American tankers are predictable, reliant on technology over skill, vulnerable to the right countermeasures. Harrison's gaze moved from face to face, seeing the determination there. Tomorrow we prove him wrong. Tomorrow we demonstrate that American armor isn't just about advanced systems or depleted uranium plating. It's about the men inside those steel beasts, men with courage, adaptability, and the will to win against any odds. The commanders nodded, their expressions serious but confident. They believed in the plan, in each other, and increasingly in Harrison's leadership. As they filed out, Harrison found himself alone with his son once more. "It's a good plan," Harrison said. "Creative, unexpected, exactly what Zakharov won't be prepared for." "High praise coming from the Steel Eagle himself," his son replied, but without sarcasm. "You've earned it." His son hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Mom would be proud of what I've become?" The question caught Harrison off guard, but he answered from the heart. "She was already proud, Jimmy, from the day you were born. But yes, she would be especially proud of the officer and the man you've become." For a brief moment, the professional distance between them fell away, and Harrison saw his son as he remembered him from childhood, eager for approval, seeking confirmation that he was on the right path. "I miss her," his son said simply. "So do I, every day." They stood in silence, united in that shared loss, if nothing else. Then the moment passed, and they were colonel and lieutenant colonel again, preparing for tomorrow's mission. "Get some rest," Harrison advised. "Dawn comes early." "Yes, sir." As his son departed, Harrison turned back to the tactical map, studying the audacious route they would take. It was risky, no question about that. If Zakharov anticipated their true approach, they would be vulnerable in the narrow canyon, unable to maneuver, perfect targets for an ambush. But war was always about calculated risks. And sometimes the boldest move was also the safest, precisely because the enemy would consider it too reckless to attempt. Harrison traced the route with his finger, visualizing each phase of the operation. It could work. It would work. It had to work. Not just for the mission's sake, but for what it represented, a chance to validate the Abrams for deployment, to save lives in the coming conflict, and perhaps to finally bridge the gulf between himself and his only son. The stakes had never been higher. 3 hours later, in the darkest hour of night, Chimera Squadron began its approach march. The 4 Abrams tanks moved without lights, using only thermal imaging and night vision to navigate the rough terrain. Harrison, standing in his turret, felt the familiar pre-battle tension, the heightened awareness of every sound, every shadow. "All stations report," he ordered quietly into his microphone. The responses came back in sequence, each commander confirming their readiness. The column advanced slowly toward Hell's Canyon, maintaining precise intervals between vehicles. Harrison's son led the formation, his tank picking out the route that would take them through the supposedly impassable terrain. As they approached the canyon entrance, Harrison heard Coleman's voice over the secure channel, confirming that the diversion was in place. Electronic signatures mimicking a full squadron were now advancing along the eastern route, supported by thermal decoys that would register on enemy sensors as hot engine blocks. "Entering the canyon now," his son reported. "All tanks, reduce speed to 5 kilometers per hour. Maintain 10-meter spacing." Harrison watched as the lead tank disappeared into the narrow defile, followed by Rodriguez's vehicle. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, creating a claustrophobic passage barely wide enough for the massive tanks. "Sir, I'm getting unusual readings on my thermal," Peterson reported from his position at the rear of the column. "Multiple heat signatures moving parallel to our route, about 500 meters east." Harrison tensed. "Identification?" "Can't confirm. They're maintaining terrain masking. Could be wildlife, could be dismounted infantry." It was a concerning development. If Zakharov had somehow discovered their true route and positioned observers, the entire plan could be compromised. "Continue as planned," Harrison ordered after a moment's consideration. "But all stations be advised, we may have company." The column proceeded deeper into the canyon, the tanks moving with agonizing slowness along the dry stream bed. The passage was even narrower than anticipated, forcing the drivers to navigate with extreme precision. One mistake, one misjudged turn, could wedge a 60-ton tank immovably between the rock walls. Harrison divided his attention between the treacherous path ahead and the suspicious heat signatures Peterson had reported. They continued to parallel the column's movement, maintaining their distance, neither approaching nor retreating. 2 kilometers to canyon exit, his son reported. Terrain is deteriorating. Proceeding with caution. The next 30 minutes were among the most tense of Harrison's career. The canyon narrowed further, forcing the tanks to advance 1 careful meter at a time. In places, the rock walls scraped the sides of the vehicles, sending echoes of metal on stone through the night. And always, the mysterious heat signatures kept pace. 500 meters to exit, his son finally reported, the relief evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. Harrison allowed himself a small measure of optimism. They were nearly through the most dangerous phase of the operation. Once clear of the canyon, they could deploy into fighting formation and approach objective granite from its vulnerable western slope. And then everything went wrong. A brilliant flare erupted overhead, bathing the canyon in harsh white light. Simultaneously, the radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Colonel Harrison, such an unexpected route you've chosen. Impressive, but ultimately futile." "Zakharov, all tanks combat stations," Harrison ordered sharply. "Prepare for ambush." Before his men could respond, the night erupted in chaos. Simulated artillery fire rained down on the canyon, the exercise controllers registering multiple near misses that would have showered the tanks with deadly fragments in actual combat. And then, from positions atop the canyon walls, Red Thunder forces opened fire with anti-tank missile simulators. In a real engagement, wire-guided missiles would be streaking down at the vulnerable top armor of the trapped Abrams. "Keep moving," Harrison commanded. "Maximum speed to canyon exit. Return fire as targets present." The tanks surged forward, their powerful engines roaring as they abandoned caution for speed. Harrison's gunner traversed the turret upward, firing at the missile teams visible on the ridgeline. The simulation computer registered hits, but there were too many targets, too well positioned. "Tank 3 taking multiple hits," Rodriguez reported, his voice tense but controlled. "Mobility damaged, weapons operational." "Continue advancing," Harrison ordered. "Tank 2, deploy smoke to cover 3." His son's tank immediately fired smoke canisters, creating a thick screen that would hamper the enemy's laser designators and missile guidance systems. Under this partial protection, Rodriguez's damaged tank continued to crawl forward. "Tank 1, this is 4, Peterson called. "I'm picking up vehicles moving to block the canyon exit. 3, no, 4 T-72s establishing firing positions." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Trapped in the narrow canyon, under fire from above, with enemy armor moving to seal the exit, Chimera Squadron faced potential annihilation. It was exactly the scenario Harrison had feared. Zakharov had anticipated their unexpected move and prepared a devastating counterstroke. But Harrison hadn't survived Vietnam by accepting defeat, and he wasn't about to start now. "New plan," he ordered. "Tank 2 will accelerate to exit and engage blocking force head-on. Tank 3 continues current advance under smoke cover. Tank 4, reverse course and return to canyon entrance to prevent encirclement." It was a desperate gambit, splitting his already outnumbered force, but the alternative was total defeat. "And Tank 1, sir?" his son asked. "We're going rock climbing." Before anyone could question the bizarre order, Harrison directed his driver to position their tank against a section of the canyon wall where erosion had created a steep but potentially navigable slope. "Driver, advance up the slope, maximum power, maintain momentum." Chen, to his credit, didn't hesitate. The massive Abrams lurched forward, its treads grinding against the loose rock as it began to climb the seemingly impossible grade. The tank's powerful turbine engine screamed in protest as it pushed 60 tons of armor up the 30-degree slope. Rocks and debris cascaded down as the tank clawed its way upward, the vehicle tilting at an alarming angle. Inside, Harrison and his crew braced themselves against the extreme inclination, fighting to stay at their stations. "Sir, we're exceeding the maximum rated climbing angle," Watson warned from the gunner's position. "The engineers who established that rating never had Red Thunder shooting at them," Harrison replied grimly. "Keep climbing." Somehow, impossibly, the tank continued its ascent. Metal screamed against stone, the suspension groaned under the unnatural stress, but meter by meter, the Abrams fought its way up the canyon wall. Meanwhile, the battle raged below. Harrison's son had reached the canyon exit and engaged the blocking force. his tank weaving unpredictably to present a difficult target while firing rapidly at the exposed T-72s. Rodriguez's damaged vehicle continued to advance under the protection of smoke screens, adding its firepower to the fight whenever possible. And Peterson, showing unexpected tactical acumen, had not simply retreated to the canyon entrance as ordered. Instead, he had found his own slope to climb, positioning his tank halfway up the opposite canyon wall, where it could provide covering fire for both the advance and rear guard. Harrison's tank finally crested the ridge, the abrupt leveling off almost throwing him from his station. "Driver, halt. Gunner, acquire targets on opposite ridgeline." From this elevated position, Harrison could see the entire battlefield laid out before him. His son was engaged in a furious duel with Zakharov's blocking force. Rodriguez was nearing the exit, still under heavy fire from the canyon walls. Peterson was holding his precarious position on the opposite slope, engaging targets of opportunity. And there, directing the ambush from a command vehicle on the far ridge, was Zakharov himself. "Gunner, target that command vehicle," Harrison ordered. "Range approximately 1,000 meters." Watson traversed the main gun, the targeting computer calculating the complex ballistics of the long-range shot. "Target acquired. Fire." The simulation registered a direct hit. In a real engagement, Zakharov's vehicle would have been destroyed instantly, along with everyone inside it. The effect on the battlefield was immediate. Without their commander's coordination, Red Thunder's forces lost cohesion. The precise, interlocking fields of fire broke down as individual tank commanders sought targets independently. It was the opening Chimera squadron needed. "All tanks, converge on objective Granite," Harrison ordered. "Tank 2, lead the advance. Tank 3, follow and support. Tank 4, join us on the ridgeline for overwatch." His son's tank broke contact with the blocking force and accelerated toward the original objective. Rodriguez close behind. Peterson's tank completed its own improbable climb, joining Harrison on the elevated position where they could support the advance with long-range fire. What followed was 20 minutes of the most intense simulated combat Harrison had ever experienced. Red Thunder fought skillfully, regrouping after the loss of their commander, attempting to prevent Chimera Squadron from reaching and securing Objective Granite. But the momentum had shifted. Harrison's unorthodox tactics had disrupted Zakharov's carefully planned ambush. The Russians' forces, while still dangerous, had lost the initiative. Harrison's son led a brilliant final assault on the objective, using terrain to shield his approach until the last possible moment, then striking with such speed and violence that the defending forces had no time to establish proper firing positions. By the time the exercise controllers called a halt, Chimera Squadron had secured Objective Granite and destroyed or disabled 5 of Red Thunder's 7 tanks. It was a decisive victory, snatched from the jaws of what had seemed certain defeat. As the simulated smoke cleared and the safety flags were raised, Harrison emerged from his tank to survey the battlefield. His squadron had performed beyond his highest expectations, adapting to catastrophic changes in the tactical situation, supporting each other seamlessly, fighting with determination and skill when faced with overwhelming odds. These men were ready. The tanks were ready. Whatever modifications Zakharov had made to his T-72s, whatever electronic countermeasures or tactical innovations he had employed, they had not been enough to overcome the combination of American technology and American fighting spirit. Harrison spotted Zakharov walking toward him across the contested ground, his expression unreadable. The Russian officer stopped a few paces away, regarding Harrison with what might have been respect. "Impressive improvisation, Colonel," Zakharov said. "The climb up the canyon wall was unexpected." "War's full of unexpected moments," Harrison replied evenly. "The best soldiers adapt." "Indeed." Zakharov's gaze moved to the tanks of Chimera Squadron, now gathering on the objective. "Your son has learned well from you. The assault on Granite was perfectly executed. High praise from a worthy opponent." Zakharov's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do not misunderstand, Colonel. This was a training exercise. In real combat, with real ammunition, the outcome would be different." "Would it?" Harrison challenged. "Your tanks are impressive machines, but machines can be defeated by the right countermeasures. And men," Zakharov shrugged, "men can be broken by sufficient pressure." There was something in the Russian's tone that raised Harrison's hackles, a certainty that went beyond professional confidence. "You seem very sure of that," Harrison observed. "I have spent my career studying how to defeat American armor," Zakharov replied. "Today was educational, but not conclusive. With that cryptic remark, the Russian officer turned and walked away, leaving Harrison with an uneasy feeling. This hadn't just been a training exercise for Zakharov, it had been reconnaissance, intelligence gathering for some future confrontation. Harrison watched as the Russian rejoined his remaining tanks. There was more happening here than a simple evaluation of the Abrams for deployment. Something larger, with implications that extended far beyond this dusty training ground. But for now, Harrison had a victorious squadron to congratulate, reports to file, and a recommendation to make. The M1A1 Abrams had proven itself worthy of deployment to the Gulf, where it would soon face Iraqi T-72s across the open desert. And if Zakharov or his expertise played some role in that coming conflict, Harrison now knew his tanks and his men would be ready. The real war was about to begin, and this time Harrison wouldn't be watching from the sidelines. The cool night air carried the scent of desert sage as James Harrison stood atop the observation tower, his weathered hands gripping the railing, his eyes scanning the darkened horizon. 3 days had passed since Chimera Squadron's unexpected victory over Red Thunder. 3 days of debriefings, systems analysis, and intensive preparation for what everyone knew would be Zakharov's most determined effort yet. Tomorrow would bring the final evaluation exercise, a full-scale combat simulation that would definitively determine whether the M1A1 Abrams was ready for deployment to the Gulf. The stakes couldn't be higher, both for the mission and for Harrison personally. "Thought I'd find you up here." Harrison turned to see his son climbing the tower ladder, 2 steaming cups in his hands. Their relationship had warmed considerably since James Jr. had shared the truth about his mother's final days, though years of estrangement couldn't be erased in a matter of weeks. "Old habit," Harrison replied, accepting the offered coffee. "Always liked to survey the battlefield before an engagement." His son nodded, understanding. "Like that hill outside Quang Tri, the one where you spent the night before the NVA attack." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You really did study my campaigns." "Required reading, like I said." His son sipped his coffee, then added more quietly, "And personal interest. I always wanted to understand what made you who you are." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both men looking out over the darkened tank yard where their 4 Abrams waited like slumbering beasts. "What do you think Zakharov will try tomorrow?" his son finally asked. Harrison considered the question carefully. "Something unexpected, something designed to target our specific vulnerabilities." "The jamming system Peterson mentioned? Possibly, but I suspect there's more to it than that." Harrison turned to face his son directly. "Zakharov's too confident. He lost the last engagement, yet he acted like it was merely a learning opportunity, not a defeat. He knows something we don't." His son frowned. "Coleman's been monitoring all communications. No security breaches since we established the Shadow Network. It may not be technological. It could be tactical, psychological, or even political." "Political?" Harrison nodded grimly. "General Mitchell mentioned factions in the Pentagon that don't want the Abrams deployed. If Zakharov has allies there, he might have been given parameters that favor his forces, or special authorizations we don't know about." His son absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "So we prepare for the unexpected." "Exactly. We assume nothing, trust no one outside Chimera Squadron, and remain flexible enough to adapt to whatever comes." They fell silent again, each man contemplating the challenge ahead. The night wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of helicopters from the main base, a reminder of the larger military machine preparing for war. "Dad," his son said after a while, the formal title still awkward between them, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Harrison tensed slightly, wondering if this tentative peace between them was about to be tested. "Go ahead." "That day in the Elisho Valley, when you faced 12 T-55s with only 3 tanks, how did you know you could win?" The question surprised Harrison. It wasn't an accusation or a reopening of old wounds, but a professional soldier seeking wisdom from a veteran. "I didn't," Harrison admitted. "The odds were impossible. Standard doctrine would have called for immediate withdrawal." "But you didn't withdraw." "No, because withdrawal meant abandoning the infantry company we were supporting. They would have been overrun." His son nodded slowly. "So you fought despite knowing you might lose." "We fought because it was our duty, and because sometimes, when the situation seems hopeless, audacity is your only advantage." Harrison smiled slightly. The NVA commander never expected 3 American tanks to advance directly into his superior force. The surprise bought us precious seconds to target his lead vehicles in the narrow valley, creating a blockage that trapped the others. You won because you were unpredictable. We won because we had no choice but to win. Harrison placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Remember that tomorrow. No matter what Zakharov throws at us, no matter how dire the situation seems, we find a way to win. Not for ourselves, but for the men who will take these tanks into real combat. His son straightened, something like pride flickering across his face. Yes, sir. As they descended the tower a few minutes later, Harrison felt a curious lightness in his chest. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he and his son were truly on the same side, united by a common purpose and a growing mutual respect. Whatever tomorrow brought, that alone made this assignment worthwhile. The command center hummed with activity as dawn approached. Coleman sat surrounded by computer screens, running final diagnostics on their secure communications network. Peterson and Rodriguez huddled over tactical displays, analyzing the terrain of the final exercise area. And Harrison's son coordinated with the ammunition specialists, ensuring each tank was properly loaded with the simulation rounds that would register hits without causing actual damage. Harrison moved between these groups, offering guidance where needed, but largely letting his commanders handle their responsibilities. They had become a well-oiled machine, each man and woman understanding their role in the larger operation. Colonel Harrison. He turned to find General Mitchell entering the command center, accompanied by two officers Harrison didn't recognize. The general's expression was grave. General, we weren't expecting you until the exercise briefing. Change of plans, Mitchell said tersely. A word in private? Harrison led the general to a small office adjacent to the main center. Once the door closed, Mitchell's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing concern. James, there's been a development. The parameters for today's exercise have been modified by Division Command. Harrison felt a chill of apprehension. Modified how? Zakharov will be fielding 9 T-72s instead of 7, and they've been equipped with new electronic warfare packages that weren't part of the original test plan. 9 against 4? That's beyond even the most pessimistic combat ratio we'd face in Iraq. Mitchell nodded grimly. I tried to challenge it, but I was overruled. Apparently, these changes were approved at the highest levels to ensure a rigorous evaluation under worst-case scenarios. Harrison recognized the political maneuvering at work. Someone wanted the Abrams to fail this evaluation, to justify delaying or canceling its deployment. There's more, Mitchell continued. The exercise area has been expanded to include Sector 7, an urban training facility that wasn't in the original parameters. Your squadron will be required to clear and secure it as part of the mission. Urban combat was a tank's nightmare confined spaces, limited visibility, countless hiding places for enemy infantry with anti-tank weapons. It was as if the test had been deliberately designed to showcase every vulnerability of the Abrams. Zakharov's work, Harrison said with certainty. Likely, though I can't prove it. He has connections in Washington that go back to the exchange program days. Admirers in the Pentagon who see him as a valuable source of insight into Soviet armor capabilities. Harrison absorbed this information, his mind already adapting, seeking countermeasures. When will these changes be officially announced? At the briefing in 1 hour. I wanted to give you advance warning, unofficial as it is. Appreciate it, Frank. We'll be ready. Mitchell didn't look convinced. James, no one would blame you for protesting these last-minute changes. They're clearly designed to ensure your squadron fails. Harrison smiled thinly. Then we'll just have to disappoint them by succeeding. After the general departed, Harrison gathered his commanders and Specialist Coleman to share the unwelcome news. Their reactions ranged from outrage, Rodriguez, to calculated concern, Peterson, to grim determination, his son. So Zakharov gets to change the rules again, Rodriguez growled. 9 tanks and some fancy new electronic toys. And urban combat, Peterson added, his expression troubled. The Abrams wasn't designed for city fighting. Its size and limited gun depression make it vulnerable in confined spaces. Harrison let them vent their frustrations before speaking. Gentlemen, Specialist Coleman, the parameters have changed, but our mission remains the same. Demonstrate that the M1A1 Abrams is ready for combat deployment. If anything, these new challenges give us the opportunity to showcase the tank's true capabilities and our own adaptability. He moved to the tactical display indicating the newly added urban sector. The expanded exercise area actually gives us more options, more room to maneuver. And while 9 T-72s present a significant numerical disadvantage, we've already proven we can overcome such odds. His son studied the map thoughtfully. They'll expect us to avoid the urban sector, to try to engage them in the open desert where our range advantage is greatest. Harrison nodded, which is precisely why we'll make the urban zone our primary battleground. This statement drew surprised looks from everyone except his son, who was beginning to think like his father. The confined spaces of Sector 7 negates their numerical advantage, his son explained. They can't bring all 9 tanks to bear simultaneously in those narrow streets. We can engage them piecemeal, on our terms. Exactly, Harrison confirmed. And the buildings provide cover from their flanking maneuvers. It becomes a close-quarters battle of skill rather than a long-range duel of attrition. Peterson looked skeptical. But sir, their new electronic warfare systems will be most effective in open terrain, where they can establish optimal jamming positions. Harrison completed the thought. In an urban environment, the buildings will naturally degrade their signal coverage, creating dead zones we can exploit. Understanding dawned on the faces of his commanders. Once again, Harrison was proposing to turn an apparent disadvantage into an unexpected advantage. Coleman, Harrison turned to the systems specialist. What countermeasures do we have for their electronic warfare? I've prepared multiple redundant communications channels, she replied, and I've programmed the targeting computers to recognize and compensate for certain types of interference. But without knowing exactly what we're facing, assume the worst, Harrison advised. Assume they can jam or spoof every electronic system in our tanks. Prepare manual backup procedures for all critical functions. Yes, sir. Harrison addressed the entire group. We have 1 hour before the official briefing. Use that time to adapt our plans to the new parameters. Rodriguez, I want your assessment of optimal firing positions within the urban sector. Peterson, work with Coleman to harden our electronic systems against interference. Lieutenant Colonel, you and I will develop the overall tactical approach. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Harrison felt a familiar tension building within him. The same tension he had experienced before every significant engagement of his career. It wasn't fear precisely. It was the weight of command, the knowledge that lives and missions depended on his decisions. Today, those lives were simulated, but soon American tank crews would face Iraqi forces across the desert sands. What happened in today's exercise would help determine how prepared those crews would be, what equipment they would have, what tactics they would employ. The responsibility was enormous, and James Harrison, as he had done throughout his long career, accepted it without reservation. The official briefing was held in Division Headquarters, a modern building at the center of Fort Hood's vast training complex. Chimera Squadron and Red Thunder were both present, seated on opposite sides of a large conference room, like opposing teams before a championship game. Colonel Zakharov sat with his senior officers, his expression revealing nothing as the exercise parameters were formally presented. Harrison studied his Russian counterpart carefully, looking for any sign of smugness or anticipation that might betray his confidence in the modified test conditions. But Zakharov was too professional for such obvious tells. He listened to the briefing with polite attention, occasionally making notes, never once glancing toward Harrison or his men. When the briefing concluded, the two commanders were asked to shake hands for the official photographers, a symbolic gesture of professional respect before the competition began. I wish you good fortune, Colonel Harrison, Zakharov said as they clasped hands, his voice pitched for Harrison's ears alone. You will need it today. We make our own fortune in Chimera Squadron, Harrison replied evenly. Zakharov's smile didn't reach his eyes. A charming American sentiment, but some outcomes are determined before the first shot is fired. Before Harrison could respond to this cryptic remark, Zakharov had turned away, rejoining his officers as they departed for their staging area. What was that about? His son asked quietly as they walked toward their own vehicles. Psychological warfare, Harrison replied. He's trying to plant doubt, to make us question ourselves before the engagement begins. He seemed very confident. He has reason to be. 9 tanks, home field advantage, and apparently some new electronic systems he believes will give him the edge. Harrison smiled grimly, but confidence can become overconfidence, and that's often the first step toward defeat. An hour later, Chimera Squadron was in position at their designated starting area, a forward operating base at the edge of the exercise zone. The 4 Abrams tanks were fully fueled, loaded with simulation ammunition, and connected to Coleman's secure communications network. Harrison gathered his commanders for a final briefing beside his tank, the desert wind whipping sand around their boots. The mission parameters call for us to advance across 7 kilometers of open desert, secure the urban zone of Sector 7, and then hold objective Diamondback against counterattack. Harrison summarized. Red Thunder will begin in defensive positions, but will transition to active opposition once we cross phase line alpha. He indicated the relevant positions on a laminated map. Our modified plan has us proceeding as follows. Initial advance at maximum speed across the open terrain, using our superior mobility to close the distance before their electronic warfare systems can be fully effective. Once we reach the urban zone, we'll implement the dispersed box formation we've practiced, with each tank covering a different sector but maintaining mutual support positions. Harrison looked each man in the eye. Communications may be compromised once the jamming begins. If that occurs, fall back on visual signals and the pre-planned maneuvers we've established. Remember, our objective isn't to destroy all enemy forces, it's to secure and hold Diamondback. Don't get drawn into separate engagements that isolate you from the squadron. The men nodded their understanding. They had been well trained, and despite the last-minute changes to the exercise, they remained confident in their abilities and their machines. One last thing, Harrison said. Whatever happens out there today, know that I'm proud to have served with each of you. You've become the kind of tank squadron any commander would be honored to lead. It wasn't the kind of sentiment Harrison typically expressed, and he saw surprise register on their faces. But he meant every word. These men had transformed under his leadership from individual specialists into a cohesive fighting unit. Whatever the outcome of today's exercise, that achievement would remain. Mount up, Harrison ordered. We move out in 5 minutes. As his commanders returned to their tanks, Harrison took a moment to survey the terrain ahead. The desert stretched before them, flat and featureless for several kilometers, before rising into a series of low ridge lines that marked the approach to the urban training facility. Beyond that lay objective Diamondback, a heavily fortified position that would be the focus of the final phase of the exercise. Zakharov's force would be out there waiting, 9 T-72s against their 4 Abrams. More than 2-to-1 odds with the added complications of electronic warfare and urban combat. It would be the ultimate test of everything Harrison had taught his squadron, everything he believed about tank warfare and leadership under fire. He climbed onto his Abrams and dropped into the commander's hatch, settling into the familiar confines of the fighting compartment. Around him, his crew performed their final checks with practiced efficiency. Comms check, Harrison ordered. 5 by 5, Coleman's voice came through clearly on the secure channel. All tanks reporting optimal communications at this time. Driver, are we ready? Yes, sir, Chen replied from his position in the front of the tank. All systems green. Gunner? Targeting systems online, sir, Watson confirmed. Simulation mode active. Loader? Ready to rock, sir, Ortiz replied with characteristic enthusiasm. Harrison switched to the squadron channel. Chimera Squadron, sound off. One by one, the other tank commanders reported ready status. Despite the challenges ahead, there was no hesitation in their voices, no uncertainty in their responses. Chimera Squadron, advance. The 4 Abrams tanks lurched forward, powerful turbine engines propelling 60 tons of armor across the desert floor. They moved in a wedge formation, Harrison's tank at the center rear, his son's vehicle at the point, with Rodriguez and Peterson guarding the flanks. For the first 10 minutes, they encountered no opposition, no sign of Red Thunder's presence. The tanks maintained top speed across the flat terrain, dust plumes rising behind them like the wake of ships at sea. As they approached phase line alpha, Harrison ordered increased vigilance. This was where Zakharov's forces would become active, transitioning from static defense to mobile opposition. All tanks be advised, we are now in the active engagement zone, Harrison announced. Expect contact at any moment. The words had barely left his mouth when Coleman's voice cut in, her normally composed tone edged with concern. Sir, I'm detecting unusual electronic signatures across multiple frequency bands. They're initiating some form of wide-spectrum jamming. Almost immediately, the tactical display in Harrison's tank flickered, the digital map distorting before stabilizing at a lower resolution. The data link showing the positions of the other Abrams tanks became intermittent, vehicles disappearing and reappearing on the screen. Specialist Coleman, analysis, Harrison requested. It's like nothing I've seen before, sir. They're not just blocking our communications. They're selectively interfering with different systems, the targeting computers, navigation, even the engine diagnostic monitors. It's sophisticated and coordinated. Harrison had expected electronic warfare, but this was beyond what should have been available to an UMFOR unit. Zakharov had clearly been given access to cutting-edge technology, perhaps even experimental systems not yet fielded to regular units. Implement countermeasures, Harrison ordered. All tanks, be advised, we are experiencing electronic interference. Switch to backup systems and visual communication protocols. His son's voice came through the static. Contact front. Multiple T-72s 1,000 meters, deployed along the ridgeline. Harrison raised his binoculars, scanning the distant high ground. There they were, 3 T-72 tanks in hull-down positions, only their turrets visible above the ridge, presenting minimal target profiles while offering stable firing platforms. Identified, Harrison confirmed. Gunner, target the center tank. Range 980 meters. Watson slewed the main gun toward the target, the fire control computer calculating the complex ballistics necessary for a first-round hit. But as the targeting solution appeared on the screen, it flickered and changed, the numbers shifting erratically. Sir, the targeting system is being affected by the jamming, Watson reported. I'm getting inconsistent range data. Switch to manual backup, Harrison ordered. Use the laser rangefinder only, no computer assistance. Watson made the adjustment, his years of training evident in the smooth, practiced movements of his hands. Target ranged manually at 975 meters, on target. Fire! The tank shuddered as the simulation system registered the firing of the 120-meter main gun. On the tactical display, a tracer line appeared, showing the round's trajectory streaking toward the distant T-72. Miss, Watson announced with disbelief. Round impacted short by approximately 50 meters. Harrison frowned. The laser rangefinder should have provided accurate distance measurement regardless of jamming. Unless they're spoofing our lasers, he realized, somehow reflecting or distorting the return signal to create false distances. This was technology well beyond what should have been available for a training exercise. Zakharov had brought some very special capabilities to this engagement. All tanks, be advised, Harrison broadcast. Enemy has capability to interfere with laser range finding. Use visual ranging techniques and adjust fire based on observed impact. Even as he gave the order, the T-72s on the ridgeline opened fire. Their simulation rounds registered as near misses around Chimera Squadron, the exercise control system generating appropriate visual and audio effects to represent incoming fire. Evasive maneuvers, Harrison commanded. Continue advance to urban sector at maximum speed. Do not stop to engage. I say again, do not stop to engage. Their best chance lay in reaching the urban terrain, where Zakharov's electronic warfare would be less effective and his numerical advantage constrained by the limited lines of sight. Stopping to trade shots in the open desert would only play into Red Thunder's strengths. The Abrams accelerated, their superior mobility allowing them to race toward the urban zone while the heavier, slower T-72s on the ridge struggled to track their movement. More simulation rounds landed around them, but none scored direct hits. Harrison watched as the buildings of Sector 7 grew larger on the horizon. The urban training facility was designed to mimic a Middle Eastern town, with multi-story concrete structures, narrow streets, and open market squares. It was deliberately complex, offering countless positions for ambush and defense. 500 meters to urban perimeter, Chen reported from the driver's position. All tanks prepare for urban entry, Harrison ordered. Shift to dispersed box formation on my mark. As they closed on this town, Harrison noted with concern that the 3 T-72s on the ridge had disappeared. Zakharov was repositioning his forces, likely to establish blocking positions or ambush points within the urban area. Specialist Coleman, status of jamming? Still active, sir. But as predicted, the signal strength is varying as we approach the buildings. We may find dead zones where our systems function normally. Identify those zones as we proceed and mark them on the tactical net. Yes, sir. The lead tanks reached the outskirts of the mock town, slowing as they navigated the narrower confines of the streets. Harrison gave the order, and the squadrons smoothly transitioned to their practice formation, a dispersed box that would allow each tank to cover an approach while maintaining mutual support. Rodriguez, take the northern sector, Peterson south, Lieutenant Colonel east. We'll establish our command position in the central market. The tanks separated, each moving to its assigned area with practiced precision. Harrison's vehicle proceeded down the main avenue toward the central square that would serve as their rallying point and command hub. As they entered the square, Harrison immediately noted its defensive potential. Multiple streets converged on the open space, but numerous covered positions existed where tanks could shelter while maintaining clear fields of fire. Driver, position at the southeast corner, covered by that building facade. Gunner, maintain overwatch of the western approach. The massive Abrams maneuvered into position, its bulk partially concealed by a half-demolished structure, while its main gun covered the most likely avenue of enemy advance. "All tanks report," Harrison ordered once they were set. His son's voice came through clearly, suggesting they had indeed found a dead zone in the electronic jamming. "Tank 2 in position, eastern sector secure, no contact." "Tank 3, northern quadrant occupied," Rodriguez reported. "Possible movement 2 blocks north, unconfirmed." Peterson's response was broken by static. "Tank 4, southern, contact, engaging." The transmission dissolved into electronic noise, but the distant sound of simulation fire confirmed that Peterson had encountered enemy forces. "Tank 4, fall back to secondary position if overwhelmed," Harrison ordered, unsure if his instructions were getting through. "Do not engage superior forces alone." There was no response, but the firing intensified, suggesting Peterson was in a significant firefight. "Lieutenant Colonel, move to support Tank 4, Harrison directed. "Tank 3, maintain position and continue surveillance." His son acknowledged, and Harrison watched on the tactical display as Tank 2 began moving from its eastern position toward the southern zone where Peterson was engaged. "Sir," Coleman's voice cut in, "I'm detecting an unusual concentration of electronic signals to our west, consistent with multiple jammers operating in close proximity." Harrison considered this. "Sakarov's command post. He's coordinating his electronic warfare from a central location." "Likely, sir. The signal profile suggests at least 3 distinct jamming systems operating in concert." This presented both a threat and an opportunity. If they could locate and neutralize Zakarov's command post, they might eliminate the electronic interference that was hampering their operations. "Specialist, can you triangulate the source?" "Working on it, sir. The urban environment makes precise location difficult, but I can narrow it down to a general area." While Coleman worked on Harrison monitored the developing situation. His son had reached Peterson's position and reported that Tank 4 was intact, but had taken simulated hits that would have damaged its mobility in a real engagement. They had encountered and destroyed 2 T-52s, but 3 more were converging on their position. Meanwhile, Rodriguez reported movement throughout the northern sector, suggesting Red Thunder forces were attempting to encircle their position. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Chimera Squadron was dispersed and being engaged piecemeal, exactly what Harrison had hoped to avoid. Zakharov was using his numerical advantage effectively, bringing multiple tanks to bear on isolated targets while maintaining electronic superiority. "Colonel, I've triangulated the jamming source," Coleman reported. "Western sector, grid coordinate Lima 7, likely inside or near the large warehouse structure." Harrison studied the map. The warehouse was approximately 400 meters from their current position, reachable via several different routes through the urban maze. "All tanks, fall back to Central Market immediately," Harrison ordered. "Disengage from current contacts and withdraw. We are concentrating our force for an assault on the enemy command post." The acknowledgments came invariably clear or static-filled, but Harrison had to trust that his commanders had received the order. His contingency planning had included this very scenario, with the Central Market designated as the emergency rally point if the squadron became fragmented. "Driver, prepare to move west on my command. Gunner, maintain vigilance. We may encounter opposition en route." Harrison waited, watching the tactical display as the friendly icons representing his squadron's tanks began moving toward his position. His son and Peterson were approaching from the south, fighting a delaying action against pursuing T-72s. Rodriguez was withdrawing from the north, apparently undetected so far. "Driver, advance, western route, 2nd Avenue. Chen guided the massive tank through the narrow streets with impressive skill, navigating around obstacles and through tight corners that would have challenged a less experienced operator. They proceeded cautiously, aware that enemy tanks could appear at any intersection. As they approached a cross street, Watson called out, "Contact right, T-72 at 50 meters. Harrison spotted it immediately, a T-72 crossing perpendicular to their path, its turret beginning to traverse toward them. "Gunner, engage!" Watson fired, the simulation registering a direct hit before the enemy tank could complete its targeting. In an actual engagement, the T-72 would have been catastrophically destroyed. "Advance, maintain speed," Harrison ordered. They continued toward the warehouse, encountering no further resistance. This concerned Harrison rather than reassured him. Zakharov was too skilled a commander to leave his command post lightly defended. "All tanks report," Harrison requested as they halted a block east of the target building. "Tank 2 approaching your position from the south," his son replied. "Tank 4 is with us, operational but damaged." "Tank 3, 2 minutes out, No contact, Rodriguez added. Hold positions until Tank 3 arrives, Harrison ordered. Then we advance simultaneously from multiple directions. Target is the warehouse at Lima 7, believed to be the enemy electronic warfare hub. As they waited, Harrison studied the warehouse through his binoculars. It was a large rectangular structure with few windows, multiple entry points, and a loading dock area that could potentially conceal vehicles. The perfect location for a command post or electronic warfare center. Sir, Coleman's voice came through with unusual urgency. I'm detecting a new electronic signature, different from the jamming. It appears to be a targeting system of some kind, actively scanning our position. Harrison felt a chill of apprehension. Specific type? Unknown, sir, but the signal characteristics are consistent with fire control radar, possibly for artillery or air support. Artillery or air support weren't part of the exercise parameters. But then, neither were 9 T-72s or sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Zakharov had clearly been given extraordinary latitude in his opposition role. All tanks be advised, possible artillery threat. Prepare for immediate relocation on my command. Even as Harrison gave the warning, the exercise control system activated, simulating the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery rounds. Incoming! All tanks, move now! The 4 Abrams scattered in different directions as the simulated artillery barrage landed in their former position. In a real engagement, the precisely targeted fire would have caused significant damage to any vehicles caught in the impact zone. Rodriguez, your approach is compromised, Harrison ordered. Circle around to the north side of the warehouse. Lieutenant Colonel, you and Peterson take the south. We'll approach from the east. Converge on my signal. The tanks maneuvered to their new positions, using buildings for cover as much as possible. Harrison noted that the electronic jamming had intensified, suggesting they were getting closer to its source. Sir, additional signal detected, Coleman reported. I believe they're coordinating with aerial reconnaissance, possibly a drone or observer aircraft. This explained how the artillery had been so accurately directed. Zakharov had eyes in the sky, providing real-time targeting data to his forces. Specialists, can you jam their coordination frequency? I can try, sir, but it would require reducing our own electronic countermeasures. Do it. Focus on disrupting their air-to-ground communications specifically. Harrison knew it was a calculated risk, potentially exposing them to increased jamming of their own systems. But neutralizing Zakharov's aerial advantage was worth the temporary vulnerability. All tanks in position, his son reported, awaiting your order. Harrison checked his tactical display one last time. 3 damaged but operational Abrams surrounding the warehouse with his own undamaged tank approaching from the east. It would have to be enough. Execute on my mark. Target any visible electronic warfare equipment and command vehicles. Avoid damaging the structure itself if possible. We want to capture their systems intact. Harrison counted down, then gave the order. Mark! The 4 tanks converged on the warehouse simultaneously, engines roaring as they closed the final distance at maximum speed. Harrison expected immediate resistance, defensive fire from concealed positions. Instead, they encountered nothing. No T-72s guarding the approach, no infantry with anti-tank weapons, no additional artillery fire. Proceed with caution, Harrison ordered as his tank reached the eastern entrance to the warehouse. This could be a trap. The massive door was closed but showed signs of recent use tire tracks in the dust, scuff marks on the concrete. Harrison directed his gunner to maintain overwatch while he surveyed the situation through his commander's optics. Tank 2, status? Southern approach clear, no contacts, his son reported. Loading dock area appears recently used but currently empty. Tank 3? Northern side secured, Rodriguez confirmed. There's an open personnel door, possible entry point. Tank 4, hold position and maintain overwatch, Harrison ordered. The rest of us will dismount and investigate on foot. It was an unusual tactic in a tank exercise, but Harrison sensed that whatever was happening inside the warehouse wouldn't be resolved with main guns and armor. Leaving Watson to guard the tank, Harrison and Ortiz dismounted, rifles at the ready as they approached the eastern door. His son and Rodriguez would be doing the same at their positions. The door was unlocked. Harrison pulled it open cautiously, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with equipment. As his eyes adjusted to the lower light level, he recognized the distinctive shapes of military electronic warfare systems, sophisticated jamming devices, communications intercept equipment, and what appeared to be a scaled-down version of a battlefield management system. But there were no operators, no personnel of any kind. The command post had been abandoned. Clear, he called out, allowing Ortiz to enter behind him. As they moved further into the warehouse, Harrison heard his son's voice call out from the southern entrance. "Clear here as well." Rodriguez appeared from the northern side moments later. "No contacts, sir, but you should see this." The sergeant led them to a table at the center of the facility where a single piece of paper lay prominently displayed. Harrison picked it up, recognizing Zakharov's neat, precise handwriting. "Colonel Harrison," the note read, "by the time you secure this position, Red Thunder will have already seized Objective Diamondback. The electronic warfare equipment is real but automated. While you were pursuing a command post, we were securing the actual objective. Sometimes the most effective deception is to offer an apparently valuable target as bait. A lesson I hope American tank commanders will never need to learn in actual combat. Respectfully, VZ." Harrison felt a cold realization wash over him. Zakharov had outmaneuvered them completely. The electronic warfare hub, the apparent command post, even the T-72s they had engaged, all had been part of an elaborate feint to draw a Chimera squadron away from Objective Diamondback. "All tanks mount up immediately," Harrison ordered. "We've been deceived. Red Thunder is already at Diamondback." As they rushed back to their vehicles, Harrison's mind raced with calculations. Diamondback was 2 kilometers east of their current position. If Zakharov had managed to slip his main force around the urban zone while Chimera Squadron was distracted, he could have reached the objective minutes ago. The mission parameters were clear. Whichever force controlled Objective Diamondback at the conclusion of the exercise would be declared the victor, and that conclusion was scheduled for 15 minutes from now. "Specialist Coleman, do you copy?" Harrison called as he remounted his tank. "Yes, sir," she replied through the static. "I'm detecting multiple contacts at Objective Diamondback. Appears to be the majority of Red Thunder's force." "How many tanks?" "At least 6, possibly more. The signals are clustered and difficult to distinguish individually." Harrison made a rapid decision. "All tanks, proceed at maximum speed to Objective Diamondback. Forget formation, forget tactical approach. This is a race now." The 4 Abrams roared to life, accelerating down the urban streets toward the eastern edge of the town, where Objective Diamondback awaited 2 kilometers beyond. "Sir, Tank 4's mobility is compromised," Peterson reported, his voice strained. "We can't maintain top speed with the simulated damage to our drive system." "Understood. Maintain best possible speed. The rest of us will advance and attempt to secure the objective. Join us when you can." It was a difficult command to give, effectively leaving Peterson's tank behind. But they had no choice. Every second counted now. As they cleared the eastern edge of the urban zone, the terrain opened up into rolling desert once more. And there, on a distant hill, stood Objective Diamondback, a fortified position dominated by a tall observation tower flying a large flag. Around the objective, clearly visible even at this distance, were the distinctive silhouettes of T-72 tanks. Zakharov had positioned his forces in a defensive perimeter, preparing to repel exactly the kind of desperate charge Harrison was now forced to make. "Sir, we can't just charge straight in," his son cautioned. "They have the high ground, prepared positions, and superior numbers." Harrison knew his son was right. A frontal assault against entrenched defenders would be suicidal in a real engagement and futile even in this simulation. "New plan," Harrison decided. "We split up. Tank 3, circle north. Lieutenant Colonel south. I'll approach from directly east but halt at maximum firing range. We coordinate fires to suppress their defensive positions, then advance in echelon." It wasn't an ideal plan, but with time running out and only 3 operational tanks against at least 6 defenders, options were limited. The tanks separated, each taking its assigned approach vector. Harrison maintained direct visual contact with the objective, watching as Rodriguez's tank disappeared behind a ridge to the north, and his son's vehicle moved into a shallow depression to the south. "Distance to objective?" Harrison asked. 2,100 meters, sir," Watson replied. "Extreme range for accurate fire." "That works to our advantage. Maintain this position when we halt. We'll engage from maximum distance to draw their attention while the other tanks maneuver closer." As they approached the designated firing position, Harrison studied the enemy deployment through his binoculars. Zakharov had positioned his tanks skillfully, each covering a different approach sector, with overlapping fields of fire. But there was something odd about the deployment. The T-72s appeared stationary, their turrets fixed rather than tracking, despite the obvious approach of Harrison's forces. "Specialist Coleman, can you get any electronic signature from those tanks?" "Checking, sir," she replied. After a moment, "That's strange. I'm getting minimal returns." Almost as if they're decoys, Harrison realized suddenly. At least some of them are. It was a classic Soviet deception tactic, inflatable or wooden mock-ups designed to draw fire and reveal attacking force positions. But that meant the real T-72s had to be somewhere else, perhaps hull down on the reverse slope of the objective, waiting to ambush any force that approached the apparent decoys. All tanks, be advised, enemy deployments include probable decoys, actual T-72s likely concealed in hull-down positions on reverse slope. Adjust fire plans accordingly. Harrison's tank reached its firing position and halted, the main gun trained on the objective 2 kilometers distant. "Gunner, target the northernmost tank position. Fire when ready." Watson took careful aim, compensating for the extreme range and the continuing electronic interference that affected their targeting systems. The simulation round fired, arcing across the distance toward the suspected decoy. The impact confirmed Harrison's theory. The tank collapsed like the inflatable mock-up it was, offering no resistance to the hit. As suspected, Harrison noted, Tank 2, Tank 3, target the remaining visible positions and identify the decoys. His son and Rodriguez began methodically firing at the defensive positions, revealing 3 more decoys and 2 actual T-72s, which immediately returned fire from their prepared positions. But still, that left several tanks unaccounted for. Where was Zakharov keeping his main force? The answer came moments later, as Coleman's urgent voice cut through the tactical net. "Multiple contacts, rear quadrant, T-72s approaching from the urban sector." Harrison swung his binoculars around, scanning the area behind them. There, emerging from the town they had just left, were 4 T-72s advancing at top speed. Zakharov's masterful deception became clear. He had left the warehouse as bait, positioned decoys and a minimal force at the objective as a further distraction, and kept his main combat power hidden in the urban zone, waiting to strike Chimera Squadron from behind as they focused on recapturing Diamondback. "All tanks, new threat, rear echelon," Harrison broadcast. "Tank 3, maintain pressure on the objective. Lieutenant Colonel, swing south, then west to counter the flanking force. We'll engage from current position." It was a desperate situation. 3 Abrams tanks caught between entrenched defenders to their front and a superior attacking force to their rear. In a real battle, the outcome would be virtually certain: encirclement and destruction. But James Harrison had faced impossible odds before, and he had one advantage Zakharov might not have considered. "Specialist Coleman, is Tank 4 still operational?" "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Peterson reports they've reached the eastern edge of the urban zone." "Relay new orders. Tank 4 is to proceed directly to objective Diamondback, bypassing all engagement zones. Use terrain masking to avoid detection. Their sole mission is to reach and secure the objective itself." It was a gamble. Peterson's damaged tank would have to navigate around the developing battle, avoid detection by Zakharov's forces, and reach the objective with enough combat power remaining to secure it. But if it worked, if Peterson could get even one tank onto objective Diamondback, while the rest of Chimera Squadron occupied the entirety of Red Thunder's forces, they might snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. "Tank 2 engaging flanking force," his son reported, his voice calm despite the pressure. 4 T-72s confirmed, led by Colonel Zakharov himself. Harrison wasn't surprised. Zakharov would want to be at the point of his main attack, delivering the killing blow personally. "Tank 3 holding position, engaging objective defenders," Rodriguez added. 2 actual T-72s identified, returning fire from prepared positions. Harrison checked his watch. 7 minutes until the exercise conclusion. 7 minutes to turn this situation around. "Driver, reposition to hold down location at grid point Echo 5, Harrison ordered. "We need to delay the flanking force as long as possible." Chen expertly maneuvered the Abrams into a shallow depression that offered protection to the hull, while allowing the turret to engage targets approaching from the west. "Gunner, target lead T-72 in the flanking force. Range 1,800 meters. Watson traversed the main gun, acquiring the distant target. "On target, sir." "Fire." The simulation registered the shot, the tracer line showing a direct hit on the advancing T-72. But it wasn't Zakharov's command tank, which continued to advance alongside the 3 remaining vehicles. "Target destroyed," Watson confirmed, adjusting to next in formation. Harrison's son engaged from his position to the south, his tank's main gun claiming another victim from the flanking force. But now the remaining T-72s, including Zakharov's, were returning fire. their simulation rounds landing with concerning accuracy despite the distance and the challenging firing angle. Tank 2 taking hits, his son reported, his voice tight. Mobility damaged, weapons operational. Fall back to defilade position, Harrison ordered. Preserve combat capability. To the north, Rodriguez was engaged in a duel with the objective defenders, trading fire at long range with the two T-72s in prepared positions. Neither side had scored a decisive hit yet, but the exchange was keeping Rodriguez pinned down, unable to maneuver or assist against the flanking threat. Harrison checked his tactical display. Peterson's Tank 4 was nowhere to be seen, which was actually positive. The absence from the screen meant he wasn't being engaged and might be successfully circumnavigating the battle zone. 5 minutes remained. All tanks status report, Harrison requested. Tank 2 operational but immobilized, his son replied. We've taken multiple hits, simulation registers, destroyed track assembly. Tank 3 fully operational, engaged with two T-72s at the objective. No damage sustained. No word from Peterson, but Harrison hadn't expected any. Radio silence was critical to his stealthy approach. Specialist Coleman, any update on Tank 4? Last transmission indicated they were proceeding along the southern ridgeline, using terrain to mask their approach. No contact since. Harrison nodded to himself. Peterson was doing exactly what was needed, maintaining communication discipline while executing the critical flanking maneuver. The situation continued to develop. Zakharov's two remaining tanks had split up, one continuing directly toward Harrison's position while the other swung north, clearly intending to engage Rodriguez from behind and complete the encirclement. Tank 3, be advised, T-72 approaching from your southern flank, Harrison warned. Identified, Rodriguez acknowledged. Engaging new threat. The sergeant's tank smoothly transitioned from its duel with the objective defenders to engage the flanking T-72, demonstrating the crew's exceptional training and flexibility. Meanwhile, Harrison focused on the final advancing tank, Zakharov's command vehicle. Gunner, target the command T-72. T-72, range now 1,200 meters and closing. Target acquired, Watson confirmed. Firing. The simulation round streaked towards Zakharov's tank, which executed a sudden, skillful evasive maneuver. The shot missed, impacting the ground just behind the rapidly moving T-72. Adjusting fire, Watson reported, his voice steady despite the pressure. But before he could fire again, Zakharov's tank had closed to within 1,000 meters and opened fire. The simulation registered a direct hit on Harrison's tank, specifically on the turret ring, a critical vulnerability that in a real engagement would have potentially disabled the turret's traverse mechanism. Damage report, Harrison demanded. Simulation registers turret rotation impaired, sir, Watson replied. Manual traverse only, speed reduced by 70%. It was a precision shot, exactly the kind of crippling hit that demonstrated Zakharov's expertise as a tank commander. He hadn't tried to destroy Harrison's tank outright, but had instead targeted a specific system to reduce its combat effectiveness while preserving it for future engagement. Harrison checked his watch again. 3 minutes remaining. Specialist Coleman, Tank 4 status? No communication, sir. They're maintaining radio silence as ordered. Harrison made a rapid decision. All tanks, focus remaining combat power on objective Diamondback itself. Ignore enemy forces unless directly threatened. I say again, focus all fire on the objective. It was their last chance. If they couldn't secure the objective themselves, perhaps they could at least neutralize it sufficiently that neither side would be considered in control at the exercise conclusion. His own tank's turret traversed slowly, painfully, as Watson struggled with the manual controls to bring the main gun to bear on the distant objective. Rodriguez's tank was still engaged with the flanking T-72, unable to shift focus, and his son's immobilized vehicle was now under direct fire from Zakharov's command tank, forced into a defensive posture. 2 minutes, and then from the tactical net, Peterson's voice crackled through, breaking radio silence. Tank 4 at objective Diamondback, no opposition on site, securing position now, position on. Harrison felt a surge of disbelief, followed by cautious hope. Had Peterson actually made it? Had his damaged tank somehow slipped past all of Zakharov's forces to reach the unguarded objective? Confirm your location, Tank 4, Harrison requested. Grid coordinate Foxtrot 9er, eastern slope of objective Diamondback. We're at the flag position now. Harrison swung his binoculars toward the objective, focusing on the eastern slope where Peterson's tanks should be visible. They are partially concealed by the terrain but unmistakably present, was the distinctive profile of an M1 Abrams, its turret traversing to cover the approaches to the flag position. 1 minute remaining. All tanks, concentrate fire on enemy forces, Harrison ordered, changing strategy instantly. Keep them suppressed, prevent counterattack on the objective. His own damaged tank engaged Zakharov's command vehicle, forcing the Russian to break off his attack on the immobilized Tank 2 and seek cover. Rodriguez continued his duel with the flanking T-72, keeping it pinned behind a low ridge. And his son, despite his tank's immobility, laid down devastating fire on the 2 defenders, still occupying prepared positions near the objective. 30 seconds. Tank 4 taking fire, Peterson reported urgently. Multiple T-72s targeting our position from reverse slope positions. Zakharov had indeed kept some of his force hidden, positioned to counter exactly the kind of end run Harrison had ordered. Peterson's tank was now under concentrated fire from previously undetected enemies. Hold position, Harrison ordered. Maintain control of the flag position at all costs. Yes, sir, Peterson acknowledged, his voice steady despite the pressure. We will hold. The final seconds ticked away in a crescendo of simulated fire, each side struggling desperately for advantage. Harrison's tank scored a hit on Zakharov's vehicle, registering damage to its main gun. Rodriguez destroyed the T-72 he had been engaging. His son's immobilized tank continued to suppress the objective defenders, preventing them from shifting their fire to Peterson's vulnerable position. And then, precisely on schedule, a series of signal flares erupted from the exercise control center, indicating the conclusion of the engagement. Silence fell across the battlefield as all firing ceased. For a moment, Harrison couldn't be sure what the outcome was. Had Peterson maintained control of the objective? Had Zakharov's hidden force dislodged them in the final seconds? Then Coleman's voice came through, clear and jubilant. Exercise controllers confirm. Chimera Squadron has control of objective Diamondback. Victory is confirmed. Harrison let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done it. Despite being outnumbered more than 2-1, despite Zakharov's brilliant deceptions and electronic warfare, despite everything, they had secured the objective and won the engagement. Well done, Chimera Squadron, Harrison broadcast to all his tanks. Exceptional performance by every crew. The ride back to the assembly area was conducted in good order, the damaged tanks moving slowly but under their own power. As they approached, Harrison could see General Mitchell waiting alongside the exercise controllers, his expression unreadable. Harrison dismounted, removing his helmet as he approached the general. Before he could speak, Mitchell stepped forward, hand extended. Congratulations, Colonel. An impressive victory against overwhelming odds. Harrison accepted the handshake. Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to my men. They performed exceptionally. Indeed, they did. Mitchell glanced toward the approaching Red Thunder vehicles, Zakharov's command tank in the lead. You've proven what I already knew, that the Abrams is ready for deployment, and that American tank crews properly trained can overcome any opposition they're likely to face in the Gulf. Harrison nodded, watching as Zakharov dismounted his tank and walked toward them. The Russian's expression was composed, professional, revealing nothing of what he might be feeling after his unexpected defeat. Colonel Harrison, Zakharov greeted him with a slight nod. Congratulations on your victory. Most unexpected. Thank you, Colonel. Your tactics were exemplary. Zakharov's mouth quirked in what might have been a suppressed smile. Not exemplary enough, it seems. Your Lieutenant Peterson's flanking maneuver was creative. Sometimes the direct approach is the last thing the enemy expects, Harrison replied. Zakharov considered this, then inclined his head in acknowledgement. A lesson I will remember. He glanced toward the assembled tanks of Chimera Squadron. You have trained them well, these men. They fight with both discipline and initiative, a rare combination. High praise coming from you. We are professionals, you and I. We can acknowledge skill where we find it. Zakharov extended his hand. It has been an honor to test myself against the Steel Eagle. Harrison accepted the handshake, still uncertain of the Russian's true feelings or intentions. Had this all been merely a professional competition to him? Or had there been deeper motives behind his extraordinary efforts to ensure the Abrams failed its evaluation? Whatever the truth, it no longer mattered. The M1A1 Abrams had proven itself worthy of deployment, and American tank crews would go to war with the best protection Harrison could help provide them. As Zakharov departed to rejoin his own men, Harrison turned to find his son approaching, still in his tanker's overalls, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but wearing an unmistakable expression of satisfaction. Not bad for an old-school tanker, his son said with the hint of a smile. That business with Peterson at the end, that was vintage Harrison. Harrison felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat. I had a good team. Makes all the difference. His son's expression grew more serious. Dad, about what happens next? Harrison nodded, understanding. The mission was complete. Their temporary assignment together was ending. Soon they would return to their separate lives, separate commands. I know, Jimmy, but maybe we could... I was going to suggest dinner, his son interrupted. Tonight, if you're free, I thought we might talk about Mom, about a lot of things. Harrison felt something tight and painful in his chest finally begin to unwind after 7 long years. I'd like that. As they walked together toward the assembly area where the rest of Chimera Squadron waited, Harrison felt a sense of completion that went beyond the successful mission. He had come here to evaluate tanks for war, and he had done that, but he had also begun to repair something far more valuable than any weapon system. Some victories weren't recorded in official reports or marked by flares in the sky. Some were measured in the tentative smile of a son walking beside his father, in the chance to heal wounds far older and deeper than any battle could inflict. Those were the victories that mattered most. And as James Harrison looked at his son, at the men of Chimera Squadron, and at the desert beyond where soon young Americans would go to war with the best preparation he could give them, he knew that his final mission had been his most important. Not bad for an old warhorse, he thought. Not bad at all.